John Lennon, born October the 9th, 1940 in Liverpool, died December the 8th, 1980 in New York.
And all he was saying was, give peace a chance. On the afternoon of December the 6th, 1980, at about 5:45, we arrived at the Hit Factory recording studios situated on West 48th Street in New York. This was the studio where John and Yoko Lennon had recorded their album Double Fantasy. The previous day, Yoko had told me in a meeting that we'd had that John was just a little apprehensive about the prospect of his first radio interview in over 5 years. But when I arrived at the studio and finally shook his hand, my apprehension completely disappeared. He was warm, charming, very polite, and seemed absolutely delighted to see us. Before we actually started the tapes rolling, John and I began to get quite engrossed in a conversation about his early recordings at the BBC. He seemed to enjoy remembering the names and the people who'd been involved in those early recording sessions. So, having done that, and having felt that the atmosphere was completely right to start recording, on went the red light. John and Yoko Lennon were both in exceptionally good form. We set the tapes in motion.
We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile.
John and Yoko, it is more than wonderful to be able to talk to you after a very, very long time. We've been reminiscing just before the tape started rolling.
Right.
And John, you've been talking about Saturday Club, so the memory is still working.
Oh, the memory is very, very good. It gets better when you get older, actually. It gets more clear.
You remember those glorious
Bernie
days?
Andrews, and I was just saying, I heard some of the tracks. Somebody must have pirated them, Bernie, in America, you know. I've heard Saturday Club. We did a lot of tracks that were never recorded on record for Saturday Club. A lot of stuff we'd been doing at the Cabin or Hamburg and that. But there's some good stuff then. They were well recorded, too.
But the interesting thing is that
Three Cool Cats, I think we did.
Did you? You've still got them in your collection?
I think I picked up a pirate record of it. But I'm not sure, because I buy all the pirate records and file them away. Don't play them, you know, keep them.
So they're all in mint condition?
Yeah.
You think he has an American accent?
No, I don't.
No?
Anything but. In fact, I'm quite surprised that the man sounds very Liverpudlian, if I may say so.
Well, you know, I mean, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
Yoko, let me ask you. We're John and I getting into reminiscing there. How much does all this mean to you? How much have you learnt through your association with John about the days before you met?
Well, part of it's gibberish, and the other part is fascinating, you know. I've learned a lot, haven't I?
Yeah, I've just about told her everything.
In a decade.
A lot of history. I would like to refresh people's memories as to how you two actually met in the first place.
Oh, it's a long story. Yoko had
Met
come...
with a smash.
Yeah, had come to London, or had been invited to London by some group of artists or something called Destruction in Art Symposium. They had some big thing going on in London. And she had an exhibition put on by that gallery. What was it called?
Indica Gallery.
Indica Gallery, Marion Faithfull's...
John Dunbar.
John Dunbar, Marion Faithfull's ex-husband. I used to go down there occasionally. I'd been down to see things like Takis, who'd made these flashing lights and sold them for a fortune, you know, it'd be garbage. But they sent me this pamphlet, or he called me, I don't know which, about this Japanese girl from New York was going to be in a bag, you know, doing this event or happening. I thought, you know, sex. So I went down, and it was quite funny because I had a chauffeur-driven SS Cooper Mini with black windows. You know, the chauffeur was about 8 foot tall, and the Mini drives up. A giant guy gets out and opens the door, and I go in, and it's the night before the opening.
And I was in the basement.
She was in the basement. There was nobody there. I was thinking,
Just in the basement, not in the bag?
No, she wasn't in the bag, so I go in.
I was just preparing, you know, it was before the opening.
There was, you know, like a few nails on a stand and an apple on a stand, cosmic, and just these strange-looking objects, just look like found objects that had been painted white with little messages written on them. John Dunbar sort of showing me around. I'm looking, thinking, I said, what? How much is that? You know, £100 for a bag of nails? Are you kidding? How much is the apple? £200?
Fresh apple.
Oh, fresh, thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
right.
£200 for a fresh apple? I thought, this is a con. What the hell is this, you know? I go downstairs, and there's a few sort of... There must have been assistants, but I thought there was a minimal audience lying around on the floor. Anyway, but Dunbar's trying to hustle a bit because he thinks the millionaire Beatles are coming to buy, you know. So he introduces me to this strange-looking Japanese woman. Nothing's happening in the bags. I'm expecting an orgy. In a bag, something's going to be happening in a bag, you know, psychedelic. And it's all quiet. And he introduces me to her. And I said, well, where's the sort of happening, the event? And she gives me a little card. And it just says, breathe on it. So I said, You mean like that? She says, yeah, that's it. So I'm looking for action, you know, and I see this thing called hammer and nailing. It's a board with a chain and a hammer hanging on it and a bunch of nails at the bottom. I said, well, can I hammer a nail in? She says, no. So John Dunbar whisked her away. I said,
Because it was before the opening, you know. I didn't want anybody to touch anything.
Right.
So he takes her in the corner and says, that's a millionaire. Oh, you know who that is? She didn't know who I was. You know.
He didn't explain anything,
Well,
really. He was just sort of trying to hint, you know, with his eyes.
Or whatever. She came over and said, you can hammer one in for 5 shillings. I said, I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in, all right? And that's when we fell. Da-da-da-da-da.
It was as easy as that, was it?
Well, but it took 18 months, 2 years before we really got together.
Do you remember what sort of frame of mind you were in those days, John? Were you a happy man musically? Were you satisfied with life?
What year was it? 66?
66.
Well, you'd have to tell me what
End
the Beatles
of.
had out then, and I'll tell you what mood I was in, because I only remember things by what tracks were out.
It's just that going on record, you'd said at that time, after you'd done, I think I'm right in saying, the film How I Won the War, you've said in the press recently that at that stage you actually genuinely wanted out from the Beatles. The pressure was all too much.
Well, it wasn't so much the
Oh, I
pressure, it was
didn't
the
know that.
boredom, you know. After the Beatles' last tour, which was 65, I think, was the one where the Ku Klux Klan were burning Beatle records and I was held up as a Satanist or something, then we decided no more touring, that's enough of that. I'm not going to put up with it. And I was dead nervous, so I said yes to Dick Lester, that I would make this movie with him. I went to Almeria, Spain for 6 weeks, because I didn't know what to do. You know, what do you do when you don't tour? There's no life. Because I've been on the road for...
And that meant a lot to you, didn't it?
Well, it wasn't that I wanted to tour so much, but I didn't know what to do. What the hell do you do all day, you know? I mean, so I did the movie, which was boring as hell, and 6 weeks there. But I was really too scared to walk away. I was thinking, well, this is like the end, really. You know, there's no more touring. That means there's going to be a blank space in the future at some time or other. That's when I really started considering, what can one do? Considering the life without the Beatles, what would it be? And I spent that 6 weeks thinking about that. What am I going to do? You know, am I going to be doing Vegas? I call it now, but cabaret. I mean, where do you go? You know. So that's when I started thinking about it, but I could not think what it would be or how I could do it, or I didn't consider forming my own group or anything because it didn't even enter my mind. Just what would I do when it stopped?
But at some stage you obviously did consider that the two of you would make music together. Did that happen quickly?
Well, yes, as soon as we got into Two Virgins, I was interested.
And this is going back to 1968, of course.
But
for the
that
first
just
time
happened. Two Virgins
Yeah,
just
Two Virgins happened by accident, yeah. But still, once I realized somebody else was as kind of balmy as me, you know, liked the sort of freaky sounds and could equally enjoy non-dance music or non-pop music that was, they call it avant-garde, but whatever it is, you know, things to hear in an earphone.
What was your sort of frame of mind as far as the Beatles still having hits was concerned when you'd already started on what was to be a very different musical relationship?
I wasn't consciously making any decisions. It was all sort of subconscious. And I just made the records with the Beatles like one goes to one's job at 9 in the morning, you know. I mean, Paul or whoever would say it's time to make a record. I'd just go in and make a record, you know, and not think too much about it. Always sort of enjoy the session if it was a good session. You know, if we got our rocks off playing, it was fine. If it was a drag, it was a drag. But it was become a job.
Now, in 1969 also, in April, you did Rape, which was a TV documentary in Vienna.
Well, it was filmed in London for Vienna, Austrian TV.
Right, for Austrian TV. How did that come about?
Well, it was just a filmic idea about just following a girl and keep following, just filming her. And what would happen to somebody who's totally exposed all the time, you know.
What we did was, we went to the famous hotel in Vienna to put it on the TV there. It caused a riot. It was the biggest reaction the Austrian TV had ever had. I mean, there was complaints. There's no sex in it. It was just a constant, you think something's going to happen all the time. But nothing ever really happens, just the pressure on the girl as she's cracking up under the strain of these strange people following around. But the Austrians never saw us. We were, what's that hotel? The Chocolate Cake Hotel.
Yeah.
It used to be the Habsburgs' castle or whatever. And we're in there, but they never saw us, the Austrian press. We did everything in a bag. So we came down to the press conference in a bag, in the elevator. And the front page of the Austrian papers was all these people holding mics to a bag, you know. And all they said was, "But John, is that really you?" I said, yeah, it's me. But how do we know? I said, because I'm telling you. They said, oh, will you sing a song? You know, I sang Maggie May and she sang some Japanese folk song or something to them in a bag. And the guy said, but I've waited years to see you. Why did you have to pick Austria to go in a bag? I said, because we wanted to, you know.
You're smiling and giggling about it now.
We love it.
Do you think you'd have smiled and giggled about it then?
We were. Are you kidding? You weren't going to see what we were doing in the bag. We were cracking up in there. Like that. On some of the bag events, one of them where we didn't go to some Royal Command opening of a movie or something. We sent 2 Hare Krishna kids in the bag, and it was in all the English papers, John and Yoko arriving, and we said, well, if anybody asks you any questions, just keep singing Hare Krishna, because they'll think it's John and Yoko anyway. They're that daft enough to sing Hare Krishna, it must be John and Yoko. We watched it on TV, you know, we were peeing in our pants.
Let's move to June 1969, and the Ballad of John and Yoko went to #1 in Britain and was top 10 in this country. Did that give you a feeling of satisfaction and of achievement, that you got a great success?
We never thought of it.
I never thought about it. No,
well,
I didn't even remember it was #1. No, it was just, we were in Paris.
We were so busy doing things.
We were, you know, I mean, that period we were doing films, records together with the Beatles, bed-ins, and it was just
But did you want
crazy.
did you want to detach yourselves as 2 people? I mean, you mentioned
the
that you
Ballad
were
of John and
still
Yoko was Paul and I made that record. He played bass and drums, and I played guitar and sang.
And in the back of your mind, was there a feeling that John and Yoko by this time definitely wanted to go their own way and create their own
No, we
music?
didn't think of it like that. It wasn't definite like that. We were just so busy and involved with things that we were doing, and we got so inspired every minute, you know, and so maybe it just sort of took a natural course.
Had the Beatles been less tense about it, there probably would have been there was a couple of jam sessions in Let It Be with Yoko and the Beatles playing, but they never got in the movie, of course. But I understand it all now, but then we said, well, she just wanted to join in everything.
Jam,
you know, just join in whatever was going on, so we had no conscious thing about, well, we're here and they're there. We were just making music.
You say they were tense, John. Was that because they feared an intervention, or because they feared that the 2 of you would eventually go your own ways, and that would be it?
I don't know whether they were conscious. I think looking back, you understand there'd be 4 guys very close together, and the women that we were with then, wives or girlfriends, had been the old-fashioned type of female that we all know and love, you know, the one that was in the kitchen all the time with the baby, and she never came to the sessions even. You never saw the wives, only for openings when they did their hair, you know. And suddenly we were together all the time, sort of in a corner mumbling and giggling together and doing 2 virgins and bags, and then Paul George and I think, what the hell are they doing? What's happened to him, you know? And my attention completely went off them. Now, it wasn't deliberate. It was just I was so involved and intrigued with what we were doing. And then we'd look around and see that we weren't being approved. But I understand how they felt, because if it had been Paul or Georgia Ring that had fallen in love with somebody, got totally involved suddenly, it wasn't like, you know, George coming in and saying, I'm going to work with Eric Clapton in a band now and screw you. It wasn't that kind of thing at all. It was just suddenly this involvement.
It wasn't in our consciousness at all. No. And I was just amazed, because I didn't know anything about England, really. And I was always in New York, so to speak. And to me, he was just another Englishman. I didn't know about the Liverpool and that, you know, all that sort of thing.
Just another Englishman.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. And just sort of, the first impression I got from him was he's sort of handsome and sort of nice and tender, I thought. But anyway, so I didn't know about all these macho trip, you know, that they were on. You know, it was a real surprise.
It's an interesting way of putting it. It really is a macho trip.
Well, yes, I know what you mean. I mean, Beatle music is not a macho trip, and that's true. And he did look very nice, and sort of the feminine side of the society was represented by them in a way. You know, there was that too. So they didn't come on like a box or anything, you know.
If we move to May 1969...
You mean Benny Hill?
You have got a good memory. He's on over here.
No, he's on over here all the time. Tommy Cooper. There's so many English programs on in New York, especially, that you see everything.
Now you've brought the subject up, and before we go any further and move to the unfinished music #2, let me just ask you...
Life for the Lions.
That's right.
B.B. Daniels and Ben.
Oh, now we're back with the BBC programmes again, aren't we? It still obviously means a lot to you. You've got a memory for all the names. As you sit here in New York, do you ever get the itch to think, oh, it'd be nice to go back and have a look?
Oh, yeah, you know, but as I always say to any Englishman I meet, most English people I meet are expatriates, you know. I mean, as I was saying off stage before, I've been to Singapore, Hong Kong, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and all points east and Caribbean and Pacific places where Somerset Maugham and all those people that I like to read and read about were, and the famous place in Singapore, the Hotel Rattles or Ruffles or something, where they'd all been.
Raffles, yes.
So, as Churchill said, it's the Englishman's inalienable right to live where the hell he likes. So, and as I say to an Englishman, say, well, don't you get homesick and come back? I say, what do you think? It's going to vanish? It's not going to be there when I get back?
But he's very English at heart. And I mean, just this morning, it was just this coincidence because we're meeting you now and, you know, this all very English thing. And he saw this Liverpool in his book and he started choking up, you know, really, oh, Liverpool.
That's supposed to be tough, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The combination is very peculiar.
But
the macho side and the other side.
It's a traditional English thing from Drake or whatever on to go everywhere, you know. But I do find myself in English parts of the world, and it's very interesting.
Do you have many English friends in New York at the moment, John?
Well, as the Moonlight on the Water song says, no friends and yet no enemies. I'm either working or family-oriented. I don't do a lot of socialising with people of any nationality. And offhand, I can't think of anybody, English or American, that I particularly hang around with. We've been self-involved since we met, and we're totally self-contained.
Self-contained.
I mean, when Elton or Bowie or Mick are around and we're in the mood to mix, we see them, oh, they're English, right? I forget. You see, I don't always divide people into nationality, you know. I mean, it's just Bowie's in town now doing Elephant Man.
Yeah, we saw it last night.
I haven't seen it, but I would consider him a friend or acquaintance. I don't know how close you'd put it, because I've worked with him and we both know him. So in that respect, the rockers that come through, I see them.
So if we go back to May 69 and we talk about Life with the Lions, Yoko, you were in bed on the cover, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes, we had a miscarriage or something to be.
Well, you had a miscarriage and I was there.
Right, exactly.
Reality of it.
Yes, you'd had great problems, hadn't you, conceiving?
I know. We had many miscarriages.
We did?
Yes, about 3 maybe.
Yeah, enough to make us miserable about it, you know, think we could never have a child. But we did. An English doctor told me something wrong with my sperm, you know, because of the hard life I'd led.
Go into them.
And he said I could never have a baby, that we could never have a baby because of me. But we met this Chinese acupuncturist in San Francisco. He said, I thought you have baby, you just be a good boy, eat well, no drugs, no drink. And that's what I did, and we had a baby.
And Sean is living proof.
He is, yeah.
He is, right. July the 4th, 1969, the Plastic Ono Band single Give Peace a Chance, which was number 2 in Britain, and I think it's still regarded by a great number of people as being a bit of a classic. Refresh our memories as to why you put that particular song together, because you've fought for a lot of causes, haven't you, the both of you, over the years?
Yeah, we first did the bed-in Amsterdam, and the point of the bed-in a nutshell was a commercial for peace as opposed to a commercial for war, which was on the news every day those days, and the newspapers every day was dismembered bodies and napalm, and we thought, well, why don't they have something nice in the newspapers, that old thing, you know? And anyway, we did the bed-in. What the bed-in was 7 days, because the press were always asking questions. 7 days that they can ask anything, no secrets, you know. No time limit, like, you know, you come in and take the photographs, then the photographers go away, and then the press are allowed 10 minutes to ask. This was, you come in as long as you like, till you've got everything you need to know about John and Yoko, or what we stand for, or what we are.
Which, knowing the press as I vaguely do, must have dumbfounded them, actually, as an offer.
Well, one of the most hysterical moments was the first day when we were sitting in the Amsterdam Hilton in the bed like two little kids, you know, with all the posters on the wall.
Flower children.
Flower kids or whatever. These guys were sweating to fight to get in first because they thought we were going to be making love in bed, you see. That's where their minds were at. Because we'd been naked, bed, right. John and Yoko, sex. So anyway, we tried to do it in New York. But the American government wouldn't let us in. They knew we'd done it in Amsterdam, and they didn't want any peaceniks here, which is what we heard the department of whoever controls that said. But we ended up doing it in Montreal instead, and broadcasting across the border. You see, and there was live riots at Berkeley at the bed-in in Amsterdam. But after answering all these questions many times, it got down to, all we were saying was give peace a chance. Not we have any formula or communism or socialism will answer it or any ism could answer it. We didn't have a format. We couldn't give you a plan.
But just sit
But
down
just
and
consider
think
the
about
idea
it.
of not having this war. Just consider it. So that's what, in a nutshell, we were saying. So we recorded it in the bedroom of the Montreal Hilton or whatever hotel we were in.
On an 8-track machine, which you had brought up to the room, I gather.
Up to the room, yeah, and there was like Tommy Smothers and Tim Leary and Dick Gregory and old people sort of clapping along and singing on the chorus. And if you hear the record, it's funny actually, because my rhythm sense has always been a bit wild. And halfway through it, I got on the on-beat instead of the backbeat, and it was hard because all there was non-musicians playing along with us. So I had to put a lot of tape echo to double up the beat to keep a steady beat right through the whole record, so it goes boom, 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 instead of ba, ba.
It's a thought that counts.
It was a thought. And I sort of cheated. The word masturbation was in it, but I wrote in the lyric sheet, because I'd had enough with the bannings of every bloody record I put out was banned for some reason or other. Even Walrus was banned on the BBC at one time because it said knickers, right? So, I mean, I'd been banned so many times all over that I copped out and wrote mastication.
Yeah.
No, well, it's not a cop-out. It was a consideration because it's a song that has to go around the world, you know.
Yeah,
And
it was
it's a
more
message
important to get it out than be bothered by a word masturbation.
Peace in Toronto, a live album where you teamed up with Eric Clapton, Klaus Voormann and Alan White. Now,
Yeah.
Klaus, I remember, was with Manfred Mann's band.
Right.
So he was an old mate. What about...
And he was from Hamburg.
That's right, from the days that...
We met him in Hamburg. He was an illustrator for record covers in Germany.
This goes back to sort of Barry Fantoni era, doesn't it?
1961.
Yeah. Right.
When we met Klaus Voormann. 1962, maybe.
And Eric? What was the tie-up with Eric? Because I remember Eric with the Yardbirds and...
Well, Eric had been a friend of George's. You know, the guitarists all tend to hang out
yes,
together.
the Lewd Men.
Yeah. And we were in that exuberant period, and we got this phone call from Toronto on a Friday night that there was a rock and roll revival show in Toronto with 100,000 audience or whatever it was, and that Chuck was going to be there, and Jerry Lee was going to be there, and all the great rockers that were still living, and Bo Diddley, and supposedly the Doors were top of the bill. We didn't have a band then. We didn't even have a group that had played with us for more than half a minute.
But I bet you didn't have too much trouble getting people to come and play.
Called Eric. I couldn't find him. I don't know where the hell he was, but finally got through to him. I got Klaus, and we got Alan White because we'd cut Instant Calm around that period, so I'd met him, and he'd been on that. And I said, look, there's this thing on in Toronto. You want to come? They said, okay. Now, we didn't know what to play because we'd never played together before. And on the airplane, we're running through these oldies. So the rehearsal for that record, which turned into not a bad record, was on the plane with electric guitars, so you not even acoustic, we couldn't hear, saying, are we doing the Elvis version of Blue Suede Shoes or the Carl Perkins, you know, with the different break at the beginning, jing jing instead of whatever. And that's what we did. We just wrote this list. I hadn't got the words to any of the songs. I knew Dizzy Miss Lizzy, but there's a couple by Blue Suede Shoes and a couple I hadn't done since Liverpool in the Cavern. And that's all we could do, and we went on. We were so nervous because we didn't know what we were doing. And she was going to do her pieces, Don't Worry Kyoko, you know, which lasted 30 minutes. And we went on. It was fantastic. It was just getting dark. The lights were just going down. This is the first time I ever heard about this. I think it was the first time it happened. They all lit candles or lights, and the sun was just going down. There was over 50 or 60
I
down.
remember the reports, yeah.
And all these candles lit up, and it was really beautiful, you know, and the vibes were fantastic. And we did the string of rock and roll stuff. Then we'd finished with the Yoko song, because you can't go anywhere after you've reached that sort of pitch.
Yeah.
And to end the show, I just said, look, at the end, when she's finished doing whatever she's doing, just lean your guitars on the amps and let it keep howling. And we can get off like that, because you can't very well go jing like the Beatles and bow at the end of screaming and 50 watts of feedback.
Exit on feedback.
And we tried to put it out on Capitol, and Capitol didn't want to put it out. They said, this is garbage, we're not going to put it out with her screaming on one side, you doing this sort of live stuff. And they just refused to put it out. But we finally persuaded them that people might buy this. Of course, it went gold the next day. And then the funny thing was, this is a side story, Klein had got a deal on that record that it was a John and Yoko Plastic Ono record, not a Beatles record, so we could get a higher royalty, because the Beatles royalties were so low, they'd been locked in 63. And Captain says, sure, you can have it. Nobody's going to buy that crap.
Just a throw-in, yeah.
They just threw it away and gave it us. And it came out, and it was fairly successful, and it went gold. I don't know what chart position. I've got a gold record somewhere. And 4 years later, we go to collect the royalties, and you know what they say? This is a Beatle record.
Oh, really?
So capitally in my file that under Beatle record. Isn't it incredible?
It is. And you included on it Year Blues from the White Album.
I think I'd worked Year Blues with Eric on the Rolling Stones show. John and Yoko appeared on that show, too. There's a film of it, but of course Mick never put it out because whatever. And there was me, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards on bass. I can't remember the drummer. And I did Year Blues, and then Yoko came on and did her blues, you know. And there was some crazy violinist. So Eric knew that number, so two of us knew that number. We all knew Blue Suede Shoes. Offhand, I don't recall what other songs are on it.
You're smiling while you're telling me. It sounds as though in those days you were enjoying the freedom to be able to do something like that, which was instantly creative.
It was instantly creative, and there was no big palaver, you know. It wasn't like this set format show that I'd been doing with the Beatles where you go on and do these same numbers, I Want to Hold Your Head, you know. And the show lasts 20 minutes, nobody's listening, and they're just screaming, and the amps are as big as a peanut. And it was more of a spectacular rather than rock and roll. Whereas actually the first time I performed without the Beatles for years was the Rock and Roll Circus, and it was great to be on stage with Eric and Keith Richards and a different noise coming out behind me, even though I was still singing and playing the same style. It was just great experience. I thought, wow, it's fun with other people, you know.
Romping through a career with John and Yoko, November 1969, the wedding album. What are your thoughts on that? Oh, yes. With a wedding certificate and, was it a piece of cake included in the box?
So a photograph of a piece of cake. It was like our sharing our wedding with whoever wanted to share it with us. We didn't expect a hit record out of it. It was more of that's why we call it wedding album. You know, people make a wedding album and show it to the relatives when they come round. Well, our relatives are what you call fans or people that follow us outside. So that was our way of letting them join in on the wedding. And we got married in Gibraltar.
That's right.
The Rock.
The Rock.
The British Rock.
Any particular reason for getting married in Gibraltar?
We couldn't. We wanted to get married on the cross-channel ferry. That was the romantic part, when we went to Southampton, and then we couldn't get on because she wasn't English and she couldn't get that day visa to go across, and they said, anyway, you can't get married. The captain's not allowed to do it anymore. So we were in Paris, and we were calling Peter Brown, who's now with Robert Stigwood, RSO, but we called him and said, we want to get married, where can we go? And he called back and said, Gibraltar's the only place. So, okay, let's go. And we went there, and it was beautiful. It's the Pillar of Hercules, and also symbolically they called it the end of the world at one period. There's some name besides Pillar of Hercules that they thought the world outside was a mystery from there. So that was like the gateway to the world. So we liked it in the symbolic sense, and the rock foundation of our relationship.
In the first programme, John and Yoko were talking about their early days together, culminating in their marriage in Gibraltar. In part two, Andy Peebles continues his conversation with John and Yoko, discussing their life and music through the period late 1969 to the end of 1971.
November 69, Cold Turkey, which was top 20 in the UK and got to number 30 in America, I think.
Yeah, it was banned here as well. They thought it was a pro-drug song.
What was it to you, John? Was it something that was very important?
Yeah, because I've always expressed what I've been feeling or thinking at the time, however badly or not, you know, from early Beatle records on. It became more conscious later. So I was just writing the experience I'd had of withdrawing from heroin and saying, this is what I thought when I was withdrawing, you know.
But also musically, it was very interesting. I mean,
yeah, Eric Clapton was on that too.
Yes, and also we did attempt a few musically advanced, interesting things in it.
Yeah, Mark Bolan said it was the only new thing that had happened since the original Beatles when it came out. But I wasn't thinking I'm going to make a new sound. But it was pretty, what they call minimal now, just bass, drums and guitar.
But it was banned in America.
It was banned because it referred to drugs. To me, it was a rock and roll version of The Man with the Golden Arm. You know, it's like banning The Man with the Golden Arm because it showed Frank Sinatra suffering from drug withdrawal. To ban the record is the same thing. It's like banning the movie because it shows reality.
Does it amuse you that people's attitudes have changed over the years? Perhaps amuse is totally the wrong word. How do you both look at it now as people that were involved in it, for want of a better phrase, and were, in your case, were honest enough to come out and put something down on musically on the subject?
I don't think about it that much.
Well, yeah, it's just like it's a trip that we went through. But at the same time now, it's cleanup time. And we're really sort of like cleaning our bodies. And, you know, it's very important that.
It's just strange when you hear people are snorting in the White House and that stuff, you know, after the misery they put a lot of people through, and like they bust us in England. And I have a record for life. I have problems getting in countries because this guy bust me. I've never denied having been involved with drugs, but at that particular time, there was a question raised in the House of Parliament. Why do they need 40 cops to arrest John and Yoko? That thing was set up. The Daily Mail and the Daily Express were there before the cops came. He'd called the press. In fact, Don Short had told us they're coming to get you 3 weeks before. So believe me, I'd cleaned the house out because Jimi Hendrix had lived there before in this apartment, and I'm not stupid. I went through the whole damn house.
And it caused you a lot of heartache.
It
I know
caused me a
that,
lot of
as far
heartache,
as
and it
living
still
here is
does.
concerned.
So I want to know any legal minds listening. How do I get rid of a record? Because the statute of appeals ran out. Because I don't have a legal mind, and I went to find out about it at one time because I wanted to get this thing off my record. And they told me, oh, you should have applied within the first 2 years. Well, nobody told me that. And the only reason I pleaded guilty because I thought they'd send Yoko away because we weren't married. And I thought, what's the word? They'd throw her out of the country. So I copped a plea. And the cop said to me, well, we've got you now, so it's nothing personal, you know. And I have problems all around the world because of that record.
Was that arrest after cold turkey?
Probably.
I think it probably was.
The picture on the back of Life with the Lions, Unfinished Music #2, is us being dragged out of the police station. It's from a newspaper picture.
Just before Christmas 1969, you did a concert at the Lyceum in the Strand in London with the Plastic Ono Band, including George Harrison, Billy Preston, one of my favourites,
Yeah.
and the late lamented Keith Moon, God bless him.
Yeah,
What a
and
wonderful
Bonnie
character.
and Delaney's whole band.
That's right.
We were talking about that yesterday, funnily enough.
Oh, yes.
It was a
that's
UNICEF
right.
concert.
It's amazing that it's recorded.
Oh,
I mean,
great,
like, they
that somebody
remember
remembers
it.
it.
I know.
Because we were doing the show, and George and Bonnie and Delaney and all that, Billy and all that crowd turned up. They'd just come back from Sweden, and George had been playing Invisible Man in Bonnie and Delaney's band, which Eric Clapton had been doing, to get the pressure of being the famous Eric and the famous George. They became the guitarists in this, and they all turned up, and it was again like the concert in Toronto. I said, will you come on? They said, well, what are you going to play? I said, listen, we're going to do probably blues or whatever was current, Cold Turkey, which was 3 chords, and Eric knew that, and Don't Worry Kyoko, which was Yoko's, which was 3 chords, a riff. And I said, once we get onto Yoko's riff, just keep hitting it. And it was a fantastic show. I don't think it was recorded. It was
Very
fantastic. Very heavy.
I thought it was.
recorded.
Because
It was
it came out
recorded.
3 years later on sometime in New York
I
City.
know,
did
that
it
was
not?
Oh,
one
I'm
of the
sorry,
reasons
my mind is not that
sometime in
clever.
New York City was not that popular because it was such a
well,
heavy
that was
piece,
a heavy
you know.
show, and a lot of the audience walked out, but the ones that stayed, they were in a trance, man. They just all came to the front because it was one of the first real heavy rock shows where we had a good backing that John and Yoko did together. And I always think that some of those kids formed those freaky bands later because there was about 200 kids at the front there, some about 13, 14, 15, who were looking at Yoko and looking at us the way we were playing that Don't Worry Kyoko, and it really reached the peak of whatever you call it. It really went out there that night.
December 1970, the Plastic Ono Band album, which really did get some pretty good reviews, didn't it?
Yes, The Mother, we did a twin one. Yoko did one, I did one. In fact, you know what we were doing last night?
What were you
We
doing?
were playing Yoko's Plastic Ono Band album. The first track is called Why, and it was the first real rock and roll take we ever did together, and it's Ringo, Klaus, me on guitar, and Yoko on voice. And the fascinating thing is, even we didn't know where Yoko's voice started and where my guitar ended on the intro, but you can tell. And we were playing it last night for Jack Douglas.
You know, this is something very strange because John, being what he is, somehow he just goes all the way. So his guitar playing in avant-garde was quite avant-garde, really. And we both suffered because people didn't appreciate what we were doing. But in fact, John suffered as an avant-garde guitarist because he was saying, well, I wish somebody would notice what I did. And when you go back to Plastic Ono, Yoko and Plastic Ono Band, that album, I mean, his guitar playing,
Thank you,
somebody
Mother.
should notice it because it's just fantastic
They
stuff.
will, we'll reissue them.
Could you use John Yoko and Phil Spector, if we stick on that for just a
Yeah,
moment?
sure.
And it was the first official solo LP.
Yes.
So
yeah.
you were what you were at long last, and there were no strings attached, so to speak.
Yes, it was nice to do it, and it was minimal again, meaning there was no overdubbing, just my guitar, a bass and drums, or my piano, a bass and drums. And if you remember, at the beginning of Mother, the beginning of the album has this bell going, dong, dong. It's a church bell, which I slowed down to 33, so it's really like a horror movie. And that was like the death knell of the mother-father Freudian trip. If you listen to the beginning of Double Fantasy, you hear ding, ding.
I was just thinking.
Ding, which is actually a bell that Yoko calls her wishing bell. I put it on the Double Fantasy as to show the lightness and the difference of the long, long trip from mother to starting over.
We'll be coming to that later. Rolling Stone gave it a 5-star rating, that album, I seem to remember.
Oh,
and
they did?
And a critic said, like all seminal rock, it's timeless in its concept. That's the sort of quote you appreciate.
Well, it's better than shithead. Oh. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know what you can say anymore in England. I hear all this. You can say anything on TV in England and radio. I'm not sure. But also, it was reviewed as simplistic and self-indulgent.
No, I don't think so. Not
there was.
simplistic,
I never
really?
forget a nasty word, my
right,
dear. Now, self-indulgent means you talk about yourself. So as
What else can we
again,
talk
I was
about?
talking
Yeah.
about this last night. I was saying because somebody said our film Imagine was self-indulgent. And then there was a remark that simplistic and self-indulgent to do with Double Fantasy. Now, I was explaining to somebody, I said, if we'd have used pseudonyms and called it Tommy, the rock opera, or created Ziggy Stardust and Sadie Lutz, and sang exactly the same lyrics as a third persona, then it's more acceptable to certain minds, you see. But still there is a distance between what the records of the songs are saying and our real selves in our own privacy.
Phil Spector was involved there, John. I think
Yes.
somebody that you're pretty fond of.
Yeah, I am fond of his work a lot. His personality, I'm not crazy about that.
No.
But it was good to work with Phil because I always admired him. He contributed a lot because he contributed the Spector touch. But of course, if you played John Lennon, Plastic Ono, Yoko Ono, Plastic Ono, he's involved in both, and you play Phil Spector's work, you see there's a vast difference.
Right.
We never gave him his head. Didn't let him go free on it.
Did he
Otherwise
want
would be
it
all
at the
thing-
time?
He always wants to. I mean, he's got a tremendous ego.
Yes.
He considers the artist like that film director considers actors just pieces of garbage,
Canned goods.
that you bring on and you wheel off. You know, he'd like to bury the artist, and so the production is the main thing. But we didn't allow him to do that to us. But so on that level, it was very good because we used what we considered was his amazing ear for pop music and sound, but without letting it become Spector, you know, to thousands of castanets.
The wall of sound.
We didn't want the wall of sound.
No, right.
But we wanted...
God's Song, critics said, some of the finest of all rock singing on the last verse. I don't know where I got that from. I've got it written down.
Who
in
is
front
this
of me.
Thank you
wonderful
very
critic?
much.
Where is he when we need him? You know,
I
who is it?
know.
I want to send him a card. You tend to remember the dig from a critic rather than the praise, you see. That's why I'm looking at you like, oh, somebody liked it? I had this impression that everybody hated the record and it was only regarded well about 8 years later when they'd started saying, well, it's not as good as Plastic Ono Band about the work I was doing later, you see.
1970, as we move through, in February, Instant Karma, which was top 5, both here in America and in Britain as well. And you actually appeared on Top of the Pops. That was the first appearance by anybody connected with the Beatles for quite a while, wasn't it?
It was great. I love being first. We were talking about this last
I
night.
know,
It's
it's
amazing.
funny, I can't
How did you feel about doing Top of the Pops
Oh, it was
after
great.
quite a time gap?
I love it. Again, I was talking to Yoko about the cabin today because there was 2 girls standing outside our apartment today. And they've been standing off and on for the last 5 years, right through the so-called hiatus, you know, when I was supposed to be buried alive with, like, Howard Hughes. And I'd talk to them, say hi. I said, I saw you running across the park and all that. And as we got in the car, I said to Yoko, you know, this is like the cabin. That's how we were with the fans. They'd be at the door as we went in at lunchtime, and they'd say, hey, John, will you sing, Sweet Little 16 for Margie and Pam, you know? And it was on that level. I said, that's the kind of thing I miss, was the direct communication where you could talk to the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, you get in that sort of Madison Square Shea Stadium business where you have to overact. You have to act like 18th century actors of grand drama, which is not my shtick. And I like that direct communication. That's why I like radio, too. And I enjoyed the Instant Karma thing because they're the people right there. And we were talking about the fact that she was knitting, you see, because we did everything together. Now, she wasn't singing on Instant Karma. So I'm doing Instant Karma live. Or it was a backing tape with live vocal, I think. And she's just sitting there knitting this scarf, and there was some review the next day, how dare she sit there knitting, you know? But we wanted to be together, and her contribution to that event, instead of having a smoke bomb or a coloured light, a psychedelic light, Yoko Ono knitted.
Did you have total control over your product in those days, John?
Well, pretty much we decided what went out and what didn't go out. We had to fight with the company all the time.
But we had to fight a
like
little.
the live piece thing, you know, that they didn't want to put out. They didn't like cold turkey. They didn't really like the extra Beatle stuff. They preferred to keep us in a box. But on the artistic level, yeah, we controlled it. We even made the covers ourselves, you know, with Instamatic cameras and Polaroid. Cover of Imagine, Yoko took with a Polaroid.
I would imagine that having to fight, though, must be a tiring procedure mentally. I mean, it must get very boring.
Well, it was sort of like an invisible fight, you know. They wouldn't really come out and say this and that, but it was sort of discouraged in a very subtle way.
Two Virgins was a big fight. That was like 9 months later it came out. It was held up for 9 months now. So Joseph Lockwood, who I still like, he was a nice guy. But he sat down on a big table up at the top of EMI with John and Yoko and told me he'll do everything he can to help us put Two Virgin out, because we explained what it meant and why we were doing it. And he said he understood it and he'd do everything he can to help us. And when we tried to put it out, he sent a personal note to everybody saying, don't print it, don't put it out. You see, so we couldn't get the cover printed anywhere. It was really due out about 9 months before it came out.
And it didn't come out as Capitol Records. I think it came out as Tetra Gramophone or whatever.
Yeah, over here we had to go with some other firm. But now you can't get it for $200.
Now, somebody told me this when we came into this studio this morning, actually, that the Fly album is going for $35 at the moment. People are like, she smiles when I say that.
Yeah, down in the village.
Well, I wish I had some.
1971, you were both resident in New York, and Yoko, I think you were going through problems because you had a custody situation for your daughter. Is that right?
Yes.
More pressure?
That's true, you know. I don't know how we survived. I mean, we went through so many different kinds of pressure, but...
I mean, the picture as I see it in front of me was that just when things were getting good, something else would rear its ugly head and maybe cause you a few mental problems.
But, you know, it was very strange because we were always having a dialogue and we were always sort of inspired by each other. We were always giggling, you know.
If we hadn't taken some of it with a pinch of salt, I think we would have both gone under, you know. I mean, it was pretty hard. But usually one could sustain and support the other. But there were times when we both would go down. It's very hard because the tendency is to go to drink or drugs. And it's very hard to get out then. But you can't when you're involved with legal court cases or immigration problems. One has to be right on the ball.
Absolutely.
But it might have done our work good, it might have done it harm. I can't really tell yet. We seem to just go ploughing on anyway, producing it. But still, I wonder how it would have been had we not been harassed. But one cannot always blame everything on the outside. Whatever happened to us was also partly our creation. And it was probably to do with complete self-involvement and not really taking care of business on an outside level and we're looking where we were going, you know, instead of looking down the road, we're always looking in each other's eyes. We're not taking the position that society did everything to us.
No, no.
We take responsibility as well. I mean, accidents happen and things do happen to you, but we do take some responsibility for the situation.
The custody fight is really, I mean, we didn't have to go through that, really. And we shouldn't have done it on the level of court cases and whatnot. But at the same time, on hindsight, I think that at least Yoko would remember that we were interested in her. So that's sort
important.
of like a byproduct.
We still don't know where they are.
Good.
Really?
Oh, no, we haven't seen hiding a heroin. She has a piece of paper saying custody, that's it.
Incredible situation.
Yeah.
But so many things that happened to us were so incredible that we just had to say to each other, isn't this amazing? And just laugh about it. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, you know.
Hard to do.
Yeah, it was like a Pinter play when we were in it.
I can't believe this.
Never
I can't
ended.
believe this, yeah.
March 71, I keep pulling out these date lines, but they're important. Power to the People, another one to add to the collection. Any memories of that now? It's not that long ago, really, but it's 9 years as we sit here in this
Seems hell long
December day in 1980. Does it seem a hell of a long time ago to you?
Oh, it just seems like Power to the People. Wasn't that the First World War? No, it wasn't. Anyway, I remember that was the expression going round those days. And I used to give anybody that was sort of left field, avant-garde, or in the art field or the political field money, kind of out of guilt as well, because I was thinking, well, I'm working class and I'm not one of them, but I'm rich, so therefore I have to fork out. And I kind of wrote Power to the People in a way, kind of as a guilt song, you know? Sort of, I better do that.
But incidentally, we heard it last night just by accident, so to speak.
Good intro.
And it's very heavy, very good.
We moved to Imagine in November 1971. John, it wasn't released as a single until November 1975. That's a 4-year gap.
Really?
And I think if you said to most music programmers around the world which would be the John Lennon track that they would instantly pick to play, I think it would be Imagine. It's had fantastic airplay.
Amazing. It was made in 72 and put out in 75.
November 1971, you did the Imagine album, and it was released in November 1975, eventually as a single. And I remember trying to find it on a single. I think you could get it on an American import for a while, but eventually, I think I'm right in saying that Great Britain finally decided to do something with it and put it out as a single.
Well, I must say I'm blank on why that would have happened. It must have been either because Klein and EMI or whoever was...
Decided that maybe it's a bit too political.
Too political or whatever reasoning they had for England, because it was a single in America, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And I think it was something to do with they wanted to sell the album, so make them buy the album to get it managed, some garbage like that. It surprised me. Actually, that should be credited as a Lennon-Ono song, because a lot of it, the lyric and the concept came from Yoko, but those days I was a bit more selfish, a bit more macho, and I sort of omitted to mention her contribution. But it was right out of Grapefruit, her book. There's a whole pile of pieces about imagine this and imagine that, and give her credit now, long overdue.
Everything we did together in those days, we just inspired each other.
Yeah, but if it had been Bowie, I would have put Lennon Bowie. So if it had been a male, you know, when we wrote Fame together, Harry Nilsson, Old Dirt Road, is Lennon Nielsen, but when we did it, I just put Lennon because, you know, she's just the wife and you don't put her name on, right?
Well, that's before Women is the Nigger of the World, I suppose.
Yes.
I have to say that on that Imagine album is a track called How Do You Sleep, which a lot of people considers was a swing at Mr. McCartney.
Well, I think I explained it pretty well in a Playboy interview. I used my resentment against Paul that I have as a kind of sibling rivalry resentment from youth to create a song.
Does it go back that far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, rivalry between two guys, it was always there, but it was a creative rivalry.
Yes.
Like there was a rivalry between the Beatles and the Stones. It was a creative rivalry. In that respect, not a terrible, vicious, horrible... Vendetta, because it's not on that level, but one tends to, when interviewed by a print press... You see, now you can hear the tone of my voice, you see. So I can say, I felt resentment.
I can see your face, too.
Right, you can see the face, and you know what I'm saying is, I felt resentment, so I used that situation the same as I used withdrawing from heroin to write Cold Turkey. I used my resentment and withdrawing from Paul and the Beatles and the relationship with Paul to write How Do You Sleep. I don't really go around with those thoughts in my head all the time. I wanted to make a funky track, and this is a good way to make it.
Yes.
Well, I remember when he was writing, it was a bit tongue-in-cheek. So it was the inspiration was maybe a tiny bit of resentment.
In fact, Klein gave me Another Day. I was saying, what is it? And he said, how about Another Day? And I said, You're Just Another Day, because that was some single he had out there. Well, I was falling all over the floor laughing at that line, you know, but in print it looks terrible. Or if I comment about it in, like, Rolling Stone or Playboy, it always looks like I'm freaking out about him, like...
In the second programme, the conversation went as far as the release of the Imagine album in the autumn of 1971. In this, the third part of the series, Andy Peebles continues the conversation with John and Yoko, discussing their life and work through the period early 1972 to November 1974.
In 72, a deportation case.
Dun, 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 dun.
Can you imagine all this? I mean, it's
what
incredible,
a life. Let's make a movie.
But Mayor Lindsay in New York did a lot of things on your behalf, did he not, around about that era?
He was very good to us and said lots of things like we should welcome artists to our shores, because this is the haven, isn't it? It's got the big Iron Lady out in the sea there saying, welcome to the shores, and they were trying to kick me out. And it's ridiculous when you look back on it, because the most I could have done was gather a big gang of demonstrators together, which the police could have shot. So what are they complaining about?
Wait a second. When we did the bed-in Toronto, there was a specific instruction, I understand, from the government to the press, the American press, that they should not put us on the front page, because they did initially when we did the bed-in. So I think that we were thinking that our peace and love movement was very subversive. But in fact, the government was very aware of it, it seems like. Yeah. They caught on. Maybe the people didn't catch on, but...
We tried to do it with humour. It was really irrelevant what serious critics in the pop business said about what we were doing in bed and bags and that, as long as what we felt our duty or our position was to keep on about peace until something happened. It was in the tradition of Gandhi, only with a sense of humour.
June 1972, sometime in New York City, which we referred to a little bit earlier on because it included the live side, And it was a collaboration between the two of you and Elephant's Memory. Phil Spector was involved. Frank Zappa was involved as well.
Yeah, he was appearing at some dance hall in New York, famous one.
The Fillmore
Yes,
East?
Fillmore, yes.
Yeah, and we bumped into him somewhere, and he said, will you come down and jam with us? So we thought, great, okay, we'll go down. We'd just come from London about a week before or something. We went down there, and I did an old Olympics number, the B-side of Young Blood, or so, I'm not sure what it was. It was called Well. It was a 12-bar kind of thing that I used to do at the Cavern. It was a B-side of some hit American record. It was pretty good with Zappa, because he's pretty far out, as they say.
He is, isn't he? Yes,
So we blended
good.
quite well. It was a combination of sort of mad rock and what I consider newspaper-style writing of songs about what was currently going on, like Attica State or Woman is the Nigger or whatever.
But the record cover, we had Chairman Mao and Nixon naked dancing together. And of course, I mean, this is the sort of thing that we had to fight. I thought it was great. But then, without telling us, they put a little sort of like a sales stamp or something on top of it.
But you couldn't even
nobody can-
steam it off.
Really?
So they wouldn't have Nixon and Mao dancing naked together.
And that's our record company doing that to us.
To us, you know.
Yeah, without
So
telling us. You
Kids
know?
were writing into us and complaining because they'd go to the supermarket, wherever you buy them, buy the record, and then they try and get this label saying the latest sales hype on it, and you couldn't get it off. It ripped the cover to shreds. They could have covered it without ruining it, so as when you got home you could unveil it. Well, what the hell? I mean, you couldn't see any pubic hair. It was just two bodies. That was her idea. She just stuck their two heads on.
Yeah.
And it was hysterical, but you can't see it now.
I really think it's interesting that by then, the record company, I think, was very nervous because they felt that we were being so controversial and all that. So they really started to do that. But it's interesting that they were so nervous.
Can I talk to you about Woman as the Nigger of the World, Yoko?
Well,
Go on.
Memories?
what about it?
Tell me about it and how it came to be.
Well, you see, the thing was, in New York, I was an artist, and I was sort of doing my own thing. Then I went to London, and I was doing these gallery shows and whatnot, and concerts and all that. Then I met John, and then right smack, sort of, I was put in this sort of situation of 4 men who are from Liverpool, and this was the first experience, taste of, big machoism. And nothing to do with their songs. I mean, their songs are beautiful and lovely and all that.
we know.
But I mean, as people, I was thinking, what is this? What is this? And I was really sort of naive about it all in a way. Though in New York, I must say, as an artist, I did confront the homosexual mafia kind of situation where the art world was controlled by homosexuals, gay people, shall we say.
Happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, right, of those days. And this time was sort of like a personal situation where I started to feel, well, I mean, what are we going to do? So we did an interview with Nova when I think I was asked some questions and all that. And I just, well, you know, a woman is the nigger of the world. And that was quoted on Nova cover or something.
Which is a dead magazine, was a magazine in England at the time, like Vogue or something.
Well, because you see, like in the breakfast table or something, they said we have a morning paper. And I would just sort of start naturally look the papers, and John said, oh, well, because he was used to looking at the paper first.
Don't touch the papers till Dad's
You know.
read it, you know.
The Sunday Morning Blues,
You know, you don't touch
And I'm
papers till
thinking,
Dad has it, you know,
What
slippers
is
and
this?
ties.
You know, what is this?
She
Me,
couldn't
a
believe
guy
it.
supposed to read the papers first? I couldn't believe it.
Unwritten
you know,
English
just
law,
on that
Yoko.
kind of,
Unwritten English law.
you know, on a trivial level. But I mean, all these things, you know, accumulate, and that's why I was inspired to say, "Woman is the nigger of the
Our
world."
good friend
I mean,
and
directly
old friend Dick Gregory.
inspired by,
Helped us by giving us
Person who knew I
black
wanted to do
magazines called Ebony,
So
and there's
Well,
one
anyway,
of which I've
I
got the name
took the
of,
title
and
and
posing
wrote
the
the
pictures
song,
for us
Woman is
and
the
Nigger
Nigger
of the World, which I
guys
believe
stood
was
up
long
and
before
Helen
Helen said,
Reddy's I Am
we
Woman
understand
came
what he's saying.
in
We're
stream.
not offended, but the
Ah,
ones
so
who
it
were
was
offended
the
were all the
first
hunky
liberation song,
whites.
as far as I'm concerned.
So that
And it
wasn't
was
played
directly
on the
quoted
air
from
either.
her,
You
but
could
her
never
singing
hear it.
it probably would have
But she did
not
do
got on the
Sisters
air.
Oh Sisters, which we did reggae on the B-side. It turned out to be the B-side. But I remember that session because Elephant's Memory, all New York kids, they didn't know what reggae was, you know. I'm trying to say it's, yeah, you know, I'm trying to explain to them. The only lick I knew to teach him was the Israelite, that Desmond
Desmond
Dekker
Dekker,
thing. So
yes.
if you listen to it, you'll hear me going, trying to get them to reggae. 10 years later, they write to me saying, oh, we understand reggae now. Any work? You know, screw you, kid. It's too much hard work, you know what I mean? Ballad of John and Yoko, by the way, was banned over here because they don't like the word Christ, you know, unless you're wearing a white robe, you can't say Christ here. So they turned it round so it would go, you know it ain't easy, you know, so that's how they fixed that one. And Woman is the Nigger, we were on a TV talk show. Dick Cavett had this national TV show, and he was willing to let us sing it because he was a liberal, quote unquote. And the company, there's a big hullabaloo backstage, and we did manage to do it live on his show once, but the hullabaloo was amazing. I mean, it was like I'd trodden on the flag or something. Isn't it incredible?
But
because
so many situations that you've talked about begin to look silly in retrospect as you look backwards now.
Yeah, I know, it's just absolutely ridiculous. You know? But when you think, it's such a beautiful statement. You know, what she was saying is true. Woman still is the nigger. There's only one. You can talk about blacks, you can talk about Jews, you can talk about the third world, you can talk about everything, but underlying that whole thing, under the whole crust of it, is the women, and beneath them children. As Dick Gregory said in 1969 to us in Denmark, children's liberation is the next movement, because they have no rights whatsoever. Absolutely none. Women have a certain amount, but children is the next thing. But the women will liberate the children.
Well, you know, just the other day, Sean was coming to me, and he was very serious, and he's 5 years old. He just said, Mommy, you know, when you say something, they take it seriously, but when I say something, they don't believe me.
You said that?
And so I said, well, I'm very sorry, that's how it is. And grown-ups really don't understand.
Yeah. December 1972, Happy Christmas, War is Over, which will doubtless be played hundreds of times on British and maybe even American radio.
Yeah, they do play it here, thank God.
Well, they do play it in Britain as well, John. They played an awful lot.
Good. We're very proud of that, and we both sang together on that one, so we made it might have been our first straight pop record together, and Phil was the producer. And it was a beautiful session, and the kids singing were beautiful.
It was a Harlem Community Choir, was it?
Yeah,
not?
It was a really nice, pleasant thing. And basically, I said to Phil, give me the backing you gave to George on a thing that George wrote for Ronnie Spector, and it's slipped my mind now, which is Try Some, Buy Some. We almost missed the Christmas market that year with that record.
You got to number 4 in Britain.
We got it out earlier in Britain than we did in America. Something held us up. I can't remember. There's so many things going on. But what we wanted to do was have something besides White Christmas being played every Christmas, you know? And there's always a... on. But what we wanted to do was have something besides White Christmas being played every Christmas, you know? And there's always a war, right?
Yeah.
There's always somebody getting shot, so every year you can play it, and there's always somebody being tortured or shot somewhere, so the lyric stands in that respect.
There's also, for some strange reason in Britain, an incredible fight to get the number 1 record at Christmas.
Well, it's the same here. I mean,
joyously orientated or just by whoever it happens to be, but I've always found that very, very strange.
Yeah, but I always wanted to write something that would be a Christmas record that would last forever, you know? And maybe that's not the one. Maybe we'll... Well, I'd hope they reissue it forever. But also we did the poster event, which is also War is Over if you want it.
You might be interested to know that every Christmas since you released that single, I've received a new copy every year, wherever I've been broadcasting.
Oh, fantastic. I wish they send us one. I don't even have one.
That's nice.
What do they put on the other side?
Beautiful.
Now I have to, now you've got me.
That would be fascinating. Maybe they put it on both sides, you know, DJ copy kind of stuff.
But it comes around every year.
Great, isn't that great? Plastic on a Band was a concept of Yoko's, which is an imaginary band. The first advert for the Plastic Ono Band was a photograph of some pieces of plastic with a tape recorder and a TV in it, because they didn't have this great material that they have now, you know, lasers and lights and machines that can do all this stuff. And her idea was a completely robot pop group. That was what she must have thought of us all when she first came into the work, because she immediately said, oh, I've got an idea, this band. And the first advert was a page out of the London telephone book of the Joneses. This is in the NME and all the papers, you know.
Yes.
And pictures of these plastic things. And there was supposed to be a party for the release of the Give Peace a Chance record, which was the first Plastic on a Band record, but we'd had a car crash or something in Scotland and we couldn't come. So at the dance hall where they had the party for the opening of the Plastic on a Band, well, all the press came to meet the band. And the band was on stage. It was just a machine with a camera pointed at them, showing them on the stage themselves. So the Plastic on a Band is a conceptual band. There never have been any members of it. And the advert said, you are the Plastic on a Band. So I just want to clear that. It wasn't reforming a new band like a Wings or or Hollies or whatever, where you have a name and you belong to it. There's nobody ever been in that band. There are no members.
November 1973 and the Mind Games album, John.
This is the BBC World Service.
You do that well, you do that well.
Yes, I was listening I told you before, Bermuda, Singapore, Cape Town. May I just comment on that?
Please do.
Come to mind?
Please do.
I read the papers when the PM, Margaret Thatcher, was going to cut the BBC World Service down. That would be the greatest disservice to peace, love and understanding in the world, because one really appreciates it, and every country does, that you don't know how important it is that the English-speaking, our point of view, our way of life, meaning the West, and our whole ideals are presented by the BBC, and they're the only ones that can do it. The Americans don't have the system, they don't have the contacts in all the countries, because they didn't have the Commonwealth of the Empire. And from India to Cape Town to everywhere, they would be a great disservice to the world if it was ever cut down. I believe it. They did allow it to stay, but I think that would be better to sell off some of the church property and finance the radio or something, you know what I mean, whatever it is, because it's very important and people appreciate it all over, and not just English people living abroad or whites living in Australia, but all the races on earth listen to that. And it's very important, and because I travel and listen, I hear it and I talk to people about it, and everybody's listening. So, Mind Games.
The BBC World Service.
Mind Games is what they're playing with the world, and they have to keep it up.
1973 is only 7 years ago now, isn't it?
Yeah, we're getting close.
We're getting closer. It's another one of your much-played tracks, actually, with Untitled Chapter, Mind Games, isn't it?
Oh, well, that's good. That was a fun track because the voice is in stereo, and the seeming orchestra on it is just me playing 3 notes with a slide guitar. The middle 8 is reggae. Trying again to explain to American musicians what reggae was in 1973 was pretty hard, but it's basically a reggae middle 8 if you listen to it. Love is the answer. It goes, but it was hard telling these, they didn't know what reggae was then. Yeah. I'm glad it's played. It ain't bad.
Do you follow what's played of your material on American radio? Because here we are in New York. I've been listening a lot to American radio. I found it very interesting. Are you an avid radio listener? You've just mentioned the World Service, so obviously you do listen to radio. What about music radio?
Well, for a long time I wasn't listening to music, to the pop radio, the rock and roll stuff, because it would either cause me to get sweaty because it would bring back memories I didn't want to know about, or I would get that feeling that I'm not alive because I'm not making it. And if it was good, I hated it because I wasn't doing it. If it was bad, I was furious because I could have done better or whatever. So I didn't get involved, and I listened to classical and music, stuff like that mainly, for 5 years. But now, once I started tuning in again to pop, of course, I'm on the dial all the time. I have a TV on with no sound and play the radio mainly.
And just for feminists in England, I'm sure there are many feminists
Both
in
of
England
them.
too.
There are a lot.
But while John made Imagine, I made Approximately Infinite Universe. And when John was making Mind Games, I made a record called Feeling the Space. And both albums are full of feminist songs of women, let's put it.
Yoko, I think really, to be fair, I ought to ask you, can you actually define a feminist?
Well, John is a feminist.
Oh.
Anybody who's aware of women's struggle and what they had to go through in the male society.
Do you have specific feminists who you personally admire?
Well, I admire all women because they're all basically feminist. But at the same time, something like in America now that there are many feminist men starting to be aware of the feminist movement and all that. And I really appreciate that. And also, it's harder for men to become feminist, of course. But they're aware of the women's movement as part of the social structure and social movement. And I think that part is the most interesting because in the end, we have to really come together and work together about it. And I don't think without men's cooperation, in the end, it's not going to work, really.
And I ought to say that during that period, you two went through a bit of a breakup, didn't you?
Yeah, I call it my lost weekend. It lasted 18 months when the feminist side of me died slightly, and she said, "Get the hell out."
And you took to
me out.
jumping out of cars, I've been reading. This was
Well, just
one of your
once.
past. Oh, it was only once.
Well, I was pretty self-destructive at college still. When I was at art school in Liverpool, it was mainly a one long drinking session. But when you're 18, 19, you can put away a lot of drink and not hurt your body so much, you know. But what I did when she kicked me out was I hit the bottle like I was 18 and 19. But when you're 37 or whatever I was when that happened, you can't take as much booze. But I was acting like I was still at college, just whacking it out and going out all the time. And I always got a little violent on drink, but somehow I used to have a friend called Jeff Mohammed, rest his soul, who died. He was a half Indian Arab who was my friend at art school. He would be like a bodyguard for me, so whenever I'd get into some controversy, he would sort of ease me out of it. But I do recall at college punching through telephone box glass. So it was a kind of self-destructive suicide side of me, which is resolving itself for the better, I believe, as I get older, because I never enjoyed it. I don't like that waking up and thinking, what happened? Did I kill somebody? I mean, the Beatles' first national coverage was me beating up Bob Wooler at Paul's 21st party because he intimated I was homosexual. So I must have had a fear that maybe I was a homosexual to attack him like that. And it's very complicated reasoning. But I was very drunk and I hit him. And I could have really killed somebody then. And that scared me. And Paul was 21, so I must have been 23 then. And that was in the Daily Mirror. It was the back page. I remember the picture. It was a Beatle posed on the docks picture, but it was pretty scary. And it was a kind of rehash of my youth. But, of course, acting like a teenager in Hollywood, in public, with the press, what I would do as an individual in Liverpool would not go in the Liverpool Echo, right? But when I would do something dumb like put a Kotex on my head in a restaurant, it becomes a national story, or take a pee in the wrong place or something, then it becomes a great, great event. It was a very unhealthy period for me. I couldn't deal with the separation any other way. I just fell apart. And the only thing I knew was go to the bar and drink.
Which you did with a gentleman called Harry Nilsson.
Harry Nilsson and poor old Keith Boone, Ringo, who is not unknown to tipple a few himself. It was a pretty hectic period, pretty wild, and it sounds funny in retrospect, but it was pretty miserable. Yeah, pretty bad period. And I'm thankful that I'm out of it. I don't drink now because it scares me. You know, even
Walls and Bridges came along in 1974. It said that you wrote 10 songs in a period of a week to get that album together. Is that true?
I did. I don't know. It's all a blank.
October 1974, we've got to play Whatever Gets You Through a Night.
Oh, Elton, yeah.
Yeah, Elton, who I did a programme similar to this with not so very long ago, and we see quite a lot of in London when he's not worrying about the finances of his football club, which he does these days.
He's Watford, right?
Yes, he's been doing a good job there. Vocals, piano and organ. Had you known each other a long time? Because Elton would appear to have been around the business quite a while. I mean, when did you first meet the man?
I didn't meet him till he was big and famous. Let me think. You've got me here. I met him through Tony King, I think, who is a mutual friend. Tony had worked at Apple, but he also worked at Decca and all various places in London. Yeah. And he was a friend of that great DJ who was a friend of George, and God, it's gone out of my head now. He was always into R&B. Yeah. And how that record came about was that Elton was in town and I was doing it and needed the harmony. He did the harmony on that and a couple more and played beautiful piano on it. And jokingly, he was telling me he was going to do this Madison Square Garden concert. He said, will you do it with me if the record's #1? And I did not expect it to get to #1 at all. I didn't think it had a chance in hell. I wasn't being very well received on any level then, you know, with the Kotexes and the hamburgers or whatever. And so I said, sure I will. Well, I lived to get nervous about that because a year later, whenever it was, he came back and says, okay, it's time to pay your dues.
And the record went to #1.
Yeah, that was great. It was the first #1 I had, actually. Imagine that wasn't #1. Instant Karma wasn't #1, so I don't think a better record.
The third programme carried the story to late 1974, where John Lennon joined Elton John on stage in concert at Madison Square Garden in New York. In this, the fourth part of the series, Andy Peebles continues the conversation with John and Yoko, discussing their music and life together through the period from early 1975 to the end of 1979.
Right, number 9, Dream, came up in February 1975 from the album. Another much-played track in Great Britain, and I dare say here as well.
Yeah, it got to about number 9, actually.
Yes, it did.
That's what I call craftsmanship writing, meaning, you know, I just churned that out. I mean, I'm not putting it down. It's just what it is what it is. But I just sat down and wrote it, you know, with no real inspiration, based on a dream I'd had. I wrote it round the string arrangement I'd written for Harry Nilsson album I'd produced of Many Rivers to Cross, the Jimmy Cliff, is it, number?
That's right.
And I'd done this string arrangement for that. And it was such a nice melody on the strings. I thought, this is a tune, you know. So I just wrote words to the string arrangement. That was number 9, Dream. Kind of psychedelic, dreamy kind of thing.
In March 1975, you teamed up with David Bowie on Fame.
Yeah, I was never in the London scene in the 60s, whereas George and Paul would be going around everybody's sessions all the time, playing with everybody. I never played anywhere without the Beatles. I never jammed around with people at all.
Loyalty, or it just didn't interest you?
No, just shyness, insecurity, and I couldn't go in a session and play like George plays. You know, I'm limited vocabulary on the guitar and the piano. So what could I do going in with Cream or whatever they were doing those days? So I never hung out in the clubs playing. I hung out in the discos boogieing and drinking and that, but I never did that bit. And then suddenly I was working with Elton, and then Bowie was around and we were talking and that, and he'd say, come down, and I found myself doing that. So he's fiddling around. He writes them in the studio. You know, he goes in about 4 words and a few guys and starts laying down this stuff. And he has virtually nothing. He's making it up in the studio. So I just contributed whatever I contributed, you know, like backwards piano and a couple of things like repeat of Fame. And then we needed a middle 8, so we took some Stevie Wonder middle 8 and did it backwards, you know, and we made a record out of it, right? So he got his first number 1, so I felt that was like a karmic thing, you know. With me and Elton, I got my first number 1, so I passed it on to Bowie and he got his. And I like that track, you know. I must say I admire him, vast repertoire of talent the guy has. I was never around when the Ziggy Stardust thing came, because I'd already left England when all that was going on, so I didn't really know what he was. And meeting him doesn't give you much more of a clue, you know.
That's very true. That's very true.
Because you don't know which one you're talking to, you know. And, you know, we all have our little personality traits, so between him and me, I don't know what was going down, but we seemed to have some kind of communication together, and I think he's great, the fact that he could just walk into that and do that. I could never do that.
You did Across the Universe on that album, didn't you?
Well, I could never go and do it, an Elephant Man. Well, she's great. She tells me I can do everything. I could make a movie, you know, because you only have to learn 2 lines at once.
I'm not talking about specifically Elephant Man.
I can't even remember my own lyrics, so I couldn't go on stage and remember all that.
Do you remember doing Across the Universe with Bowie? You played guitar on that?
Did I play on that too?
I think you did.
Oh, yeah, my God, jeez, I did, yeah.
A lot of die-hard fans of the old days in Britain would say, yeah, John Lennon's our king rocker.
Oh, that's nice.
How does John Lennon feel about that statement?
Well,
Three people said that to me before I left London.
Well,
friends of mine.
good on you. I'll knight you as the king of rock. I now call you Sir Whoever.
You did Bebop-A-Lula, Sweet Little
I
16,
love it.
Peggy Sue.
Yeah, there's millions. I would do albums of that stuff, but I get slack for, oh, he can't write anymore. I like to just go in.
Was that the case at the time, John?
There was a bit of that, you know, oh, he's run dry, so he has to do these. I did them for the pure hell of it. And that was the first one where I gave Spector his head, although it came to a different kind of head in the end. Another long story. If you look at the album, there's about 5 of Spector's, and then there's 5 I knocked off in 5 days, which was Bebop-A-Lula and the Holly stuff and the Carla Thomas, Sam Cooke song and all that, because he ran away with the tapes. He called me. Yeah, he ran off with the 16 tracks and locked them in his garage or somewhere. I couldn't get him, and he called me one night. A very far-out guy, you know. He calls me and said... He calls me, and we're in the middle of the session, because they had never got that close to him on the Imagine and the Plastic Ono things, because he'd been very good and just come and gone away again, and I hadn't really got to know him. On the Rock and Roll, it took me 3 weeks to convince him that I wasn't going to co-produce with him, and I wasn't going to go in the control room. I said, I just want to be a singer. You just treat me like Ronnie. We'll pick the material. I just want to sing. I don't want anything to do with production or writing or creation. I just want to sing. So I finally convinced him. Anyway, long story short, one day when he didn't want to work one night, he called me and said, the studio's been burnt down. In the early days, I didn't know about him, you know. I didn't know how far away he was. So I said, oh, the studio's burnt down. So anyway, A couple of hours passed. The studio's burnt down. So I get somebody to call. The studio hasn't been burnt down. That was the Sunday. The following Sunday he calls me and he says, on the phone, "Hey, Johnny." I said, "Oh, there you are, Phil. What happened? We're supposed to be doing a session on it." "I've got the John Dean tapes." I says, "What?" "I've got the John Dean tapes."
Watergate.
Right, Watergate. I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "The house is surrounded by helicopters now. They're trying to get him." I said, "The house is surrounded. I'm buying this garbage, you know." So I'm saying, "The house is surrounded. You got the John Dean tapes." I said, "Well, what about our session? You know, aren't we supposed to be finishing or something? You know, it's costing money, this." And he said, I said, "What are you doing to John?" "I'm the only one that knows how to tell whether they've been doctored or edited or not." I said, "Well, what he was telling me in his own sweet way was he had my tapes." Not the John Dean Watergate tapes. He had my tapes locked in the cellar behind the barbed wire and the Afghan dogs and the machine guns. So there's no way you could get them. So that album was stopped in the middle for a year. We had to sue through Capitol to get him back off him. By then it had been going on and on and on, and it was the Tampax Lost Weekend period as well, and it was all hell was going on. And I'd somehow got committed to producing Harry Nilsson's album, which... That's when I sobered up in Harry Nilsson's album, because I took Keith Moon and Harry and all them, and I'd lost the John Dean tapes. I'd lost them, so that album was quit. I'd promised Harry in a drunken stupor I'd produce him. And we rented this house. I thought, get them all in one house and they'll behave themselves. So we got Keith Moon. It was the wrong thing to do. I had Keith Moon, Harry Nilsson, and Ringo. All these people living in a house on the beach, formerly where Kennedy and Marilyn had been, or something like that, on one of those L.A. houses on the beach. And one day I realized, Jesus, I'm the producer. They're going to be asking me where the tapes are. And we'd go in, the bottle would be out, and everybody was just falling on the floor, and nobody was working. So I sobered up then. I just quit cold turkey, the drink. Finished off Harry's album. Harry doesn't know when to quit. He wants to go on and on and on. Mixing, every time you mix it, he wants to do it again. So I ran away to New York with the Harry tapes. I didn't steal them. I said, "Harry, you got to leave me alone to finish this. I'm supposed to be producing it." He followed me to New York. I finally had to tell him and say, "Harry, get the hell out. I want to finish this record." And we got the rock and roll tapes back from Spectre, finally. And I was in the middle of Walls and Bridges. And all hell was going on. And I finished off the rock and roll thing in 5 days. I did about 8 tracks, all in one after the other, because what I found is when I just sort of relaxed, all the words to Stand By Me, Be Popular, I knew them all from being 15. They all just came back like that. So it was simple. But funnily enough, at the end of the rock and roll, on a track called Just Because, which Phil wanted me to sing, I didn't know it that well. You hear me saying, "And so we say farewell from Record Plant West." And something flashed through my mind as I said it. Am I really saying farewell to the business? It wasn't conscious. And it was a long, long time before I did take time out. And I looked at the cover, which I'd chosen, which is a picture of me in Hamburg.
That's right.
First time we got there. And the other famous picture that's around in all the Beatle books is a picture of me on stage with the group before Paul had joined. And I'm in a white jacket. It's in the Hunter Davis book and all of them. That was the day, the first day I sang Bebopalula at a church fete with a band called the Quarrymen. It was the day I met Paul, and he was in the audience. A mutual friend had brought him. So I thought, is this some kind of karmic thing? Here I am with this old picture of me in Hamburg from 61, and I'm saying farewell from Record Plant, and I'm ending as I started, singing this straight rock and roll stuff. Because that was really the last record I made, even though it came out at a different order from Walls and Bridges, I think. They came out backwards order because of what...
Then there was the Shaved Fish album, which was a collection of hit singles.
Well, hit and misses, I think, you know, on Nears. That was another thing. Was it a subconscious move? Did I know I wasn't going to be on Capital EMI anymore? I had no thoughts about it. But what I found out was when I went to look for the Cold Turkey master tapes, nobody knew where they were. I had to use dubs of Power to the People because the tapes had gone. Nobody gave a damn at the record companies because they weren't that big enough for them to be interested. So what I realized, if I don't put this Shaved Fish together, that's why I didn't call it Oldies but Goldies or the best of, because it wasn't. Some of them didn't hardly get any airplay. But I thought if I don't put this package together, some of the work's just going to go. It'll be lost forever. So I put it together and sort of, at least it's there now for anybody who's interested.
On that subject, are you aware of the amount of Beatles product that has been reissued in various forms over the last few years? We've had an album of the Beatles ballads, we've had the Beatles doing rock and roll, we've almost had the Beatles doing things the Beatles didn't do.
Yes, I know. But some of them I was aware of because they would call about it, and I asked for George Martin to reproduce them. They wanted to do them in some way or other. I've forgotten what it was, that double package that they did. And I was involved in that respect about just checking the condition of them, because I didn't want lousy versions going out. I wanted them to be as was. And I asked Capital EMI, or EMI Capital, whichever it is, please ask George Martin, would he take care of it so that at least he knows what to do with it. I didn't want some strange guy making dub versions of it and putting it out, because some of the versions that were going out, the reissues, were pretty poor. I hadn't even listened to them because I just presumed they'd take the tape as we made it and make a master and put it out again. But they didn't. They'd been screwing around with a few of the early ones. I didn't know that till it was too late. So on that last package where they had Beatles, different periods, that one, I made sure that George... The red and the blue, that one. I made sure George Martin was there, and I made sure they put that picture, which I got Linda to take of the four Beatles in the same pose as their very first album, over the EMI office in that other place, some square, I've forgotten.
Manchester Square.
Manchester Square. So I was involved in that respect, in that package, making sure that the cover was what I wanted and that the sound was done by George Martin. So I don't mind that one.
And you checked the remix too.
Checked the remix after he'd done it, and it was as good as you could get out of it, whatever mono recording we did then.
Vocals right, everything else left, or Vicky Berkey?
Yeah, that was surprised me. I don't know what we were doing then. I want to talk to George Martin about that. Why were we always putting the drums on the right and why wasn't it in the middle? I was surprised. I always thought in terms of mono, anyway. I wasn't that sold on stereo.
Almost made Kenny Everett an extra Beatle, you know.
Oh, yeah,
Did some wonderful editing jobs.
Well, Jack Douglas, who worked with us on this thing, Double Fantasy, and he worked with us on Fly, approximately Mind Games. He goes way back. He was the young engineer those days.
He put the strings on Imagine. And,
yeah. Well, he was saying that the way they learned how to reproduce Beatle music in studios and on stage was because of those extraordinary stereo things. They could isolate the vocals, the harmony, and learn that, and then isolate the other side and learn that, and that's what they were doing. But I don't know why the hell we did that. I have to ask George Martin.
1975, when you retired and went underground, for want of a better phrase, you said, I have made my contribution to society.
I didn't.
No,
this is the funny thing.
That.
You know how you're saying, well, were you laughing during the bed-ins and the bags and all that? It's funny that you're laughing about it. Of course we were laughing. We had fun. Also, the fun of when we weren't doing anything was all these amazing stories. They had in the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, that I'd gone bald. They showed before and after pictures. They used a picture of me with a berry on.
You shouldn't have played with Elton.
This is not a wig, you know.
Elton John. That's
yeah, right. So anyway, a couple of stories went around. One that I'd gone completely bald, and the other was that I'd made this extraordinary statement that I made. I mean, you can hear how I talk. Can you imagine me saying that? I've made my contribution to society, and what is it? What does it go next?
No, that pretty well was
and
the
I
quote.
will no longer work again. It was the whole quote. I never said that because I didn't talk to any reporters or radio people.
Or anybody.
Or anybody for the 5 years that I was underground, as you call it. I didn't talk to anybody, so I never said that. I don't know where they got it from.
And we were way overground on the 7th floor of Dakota.
we were high as kites, my dear. Underground. That was the Newsweek. You see how the media self-perpetuates itself? Now, the first interview we did after the 5 years, we chose to do through Newsweek, for whatever reasons.
I've read it. Yes.
Right, okay. So they ask us the questions, she goes back, the editor rephrases the questions. And when she sat down with me with a little tape recorder and said, what made you withdraw from the public for 5 years, was how she put it. When she gets back there, the editor says, underground. You know why? I've worked out the psychology, because Abby Hoffman had just come out from the underground, so they tie Hoffman, Lennon, why were you underground? I wasn't underground. I was overground. I was all over the place, like I said, all over the world, traveling. And we were doing all kinds of business, and you might have heard cows and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we were pretty damn active. We just weren't in the papers. We weren't available for comment, that's all.
Did you say something to the extent, but life doesn't end, when you cut off your subscription to Billboard?
I did say that, but I said that after. I mean, the quotes are correct in Newsweek. It's just that the questions was rephrased.
Yeah.
So let's not perpetuate that underground. There's no underground about it. It was not underground at all.
We had a good time.
Yeah, we were having a fine old time. It's just that we were making no comment. When Elvis died, people were harassing me in Tokyo for a comment. Well, I'll give it you now. He died when he went in the army. So, you know, that's when they killed him. That's when they castrated him. So the rest of it was just a living death.
You've said that you reversed roles, that John...
Yes, my dear.
Looked after... looked after Sean. How good a cook are you, John?
Not bad, not great. I mastered the art of rice. They say anyone can cook rice, but few can cook it well. I can cook it reasonably well. I can do fish.
You're a good bread maker, right?
I've learned to make bread, which I was thrilled with. I took a Polaroid of my first bread, you know. There's these two I couldn't believe they came out like that. Because
in a good old macho tradition, I mean, you had to record it in history, you know what I mean?
I was thrilled, you know. It is not macho. Anybody would. It was the first bread. It looked great, you know, and it tasted good. I was pretty damn good at it. And so for about half a year, I was providing the food for Yoko, the baby. Even the staff was eating. I was so excited that I could do it. But after a bit, it was wearing me out, because life becomes, as most housewives know,
routine.
A routine of between the meals, you see. Before breakfast starts, you've got a little time to yourself, a coffee and a smoke or whatever, and then everybody comes out, wants to eat. Okay, feed them. You don't get a gold record. They just swallow it. If they swallow it, that means you were a hit. If they don't swallow it, it means you did something wrong, you know.
But
so then you're thinking, what wrong? What?
Yeah,
that's how I really feminized in a different way. And it was quite an experience. It was equivalent to, say, going to a monastery and withdrawing in that way, but not going to a Zen monastery or going to India to meditate. So in that way, it was a withdrawal. It was a Zen experience to master that cooking thing and put as much energy into that bread and make it right, quickly. You know, not just whack it away. I took it from scratch, none of that buy a packet of Pillsbury or something and just it blows up into bread. From scratch with the flour and the hand, doing by hand. And then the time between breakfast and lunch is very quick. You hardly have time to read the paper. That's presuming it ain't raining and the babysitter can take the child out, so you get a break from the constant, Daddy, look at this, Daddy, look at that, look, you know, look at me, look at me, look at me. Feed the cats. Then it's bloody lunchtime. So this went on for about 9 months. I really enjoyed it because I put my mind to it. The meals is what you live. You live a regulation of between meals. And on the other side of me that had always just been served by women, wives, girlfriends, who you just sort of flop in drunk and expect some girlfriend at college to make the breakfast the next morning, even though she'd been drunk as a dog too with you. Suddenly to get on the other side of the counter, it was quite an experience, and I appreciated what women had done for me all my life that I never even thought about.
A woman's work is never done, you know.
Oh, it's so true, love. It's so true. It's never ever done, you know.
And you know, he makes this
and then
bread.
There's the dishes, that bloody machine.
If you make bread, you want people to eat it. And if they don't eat, it's a personal insult. So he went through that one. Well, Yoko, aren't you eating this? You know, I made it.
You didn't like the bread, Yoko.
No, it's just that I'm not hungry.
Well,
thank you.
The mother's always hanging around saying, eat up, clean up your plate, because she's put all the sweat into it, and then the kid comes and says, I don't like sausage.
Did you become a dictatorial mother, and did you not appreciate...
No.
No, he wasn't, but he was going through the experience with a, you know, sort of tongue-in-cheek way. And
they love the bread. I make it 2 on Friday. It's supposed to last a week. It'd be gone Saturday afternoon. Like pigs, woomph, gone. So I started buying the bread again pretty damn quick.
Well, if you don't eat it, you're offended. If we eat it up, then you think, well, I mean, I have to make it again. You know, it's that one.
But I enjoyed it, and I looked on it as a discipline, and that's how I approached it.
But
and through that, I got into...
And one of the most important facets of that world, surely, was that it gave you a great deal of time to spend with your son, Sean.
Yeah, because between Yoko and I cannot do figures and numbers. I'm not good at business. And somebody had to take the care of business, whether it was beetle apples or surviving inflation or whatever you call it. And there's no way I can do it. I don't have that talent. So she had to do it. She has the talent to do it. So I had to contribute something, not just sit around either talking about the former greatness of the Beatles or the fact that, well, I'm not writing songs, so what am I supposed to do? So I had the early relationship with Sean because she would go to the office, even though the office was only downstairs in the same building. She was still not there. And so Sean and I would spend this time together. And it was fantastic because, as I said in some interview, with Julian, my first child, I was just toured the world. I would come home and there'd be a 12-year-old boy there who I had no relationship whatsoever. And now he's 17. I'm getting a relationship now because I can talk and about music and whatever he's into and girlfriends and that kind of stuff. It was a strange child in the house. I'd come back from Australia and he'd be different size. I wouldn't even recognise the way he looked half the time.
Yeah.
I didn't want that to be like that with Sean. And the timing was just right for me to do all that as well. And it's great, the jokes. They did a thing on Saturday Night Live. They had me in an apron, and Yoko was with a tie and all that. And they did a real good skit on us, and we were hysterical. I mean, it was just very, very funny. All the time I kept getting on and saying, "Oh, look, the oven's burning," you know, and that was the skit of me. But I don't mind Mickey taking at all, because to me, I approached it intellectually at first as a kind of Zen discipline. Make the bread, conquer the rice. Conquer that dependence on woman. Even if I'm alone, I can now cook enough to get by.
I mean, most men probably resent the fact that they have to depend on women on those things.
They like their independence. They like to be able to go in the kitchen and cook.
When you think about it, at school, I wish they taught us practical things. I wish I could type so as I could write quickly, right, which I've self-taught myself, but it's still not fast enough, right? I wish I'd been taught to cook, so as I could look after myself when my auntie was not there or something. I know you were there most of the time, but sometimes you went there. But whenever, you know, when I was a bit older and coming in at odd times or getting in a flat when I was at college, suddenly there's this tin of beans, you know, or living on fish and chips. If you just taught to cook, type, and a few practical things, and to drive, instead of all this garbage about the spinning jenny, you know, who gives a damn about the spinning jenny, you know?
Now, I want to ask you about writing. I mean, writing 10 songs in a week, as I believe you did, we mentioned it earlier, for the Walls and Bridges album. That seems to me to be an awful lot of pressure. How exactly do you go about writing, John, these days, or both of you, in fact, as a combination? Which of those two is the more important?
Looking back at it, whenever I comment about writing, I always seem to have been suffering, whether it was writing day in the life or whatever. It's some kind of suffering, so I always seem to have an intense time writing and thinking this is the end and nothing's coming and this is dumb and this is no good and all that business. So not writing for the 5 years, which I didn't pick up a guitar or anything, and not trying to write, not making an attempt to write or anything like that. So what you said about Walls and Bridges applies to Double Fantasy. I was in Bermuda and Yoko was in New York doing some business. I was in Bermuda with Sean and the nanny and that kind of stuff. And then when we made a tentative decision to make a record, I didn't have any material. Then suddenly it all came to me. All the songs that are on Double Fantasy all came within a period of 3 weeks in Bermuda after 5 years of nothing. Not trying, but nothing coming anyway. No inspiration, no anything. Then suddenly, boom, 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 boom.
See, he's a very fast writer because it's an inspiration. It just comes through him. So it's just a matter of writing it down almost. When we did Double Fantasy, I was in New York and he was in Bermuda, and we would sort of communicate on the phone. I would say, well, what about this? And then he would call me maybe 4 hours later and say, what about this? We'd be singing to each other. And that was the dialogue. It was very strange. And we went through sort of like a paradoxical feeling of, well, half resisting. Well, I don't want to hear a song now. I'm very tired. But, well, I mean, I've heard yours. Oh, right. Well, let's hear it then. You know, that sort of thing. I went through that. And then we were going to go to the studio. And because of that, I felt we're both big-headed people. And so maybe we're going to fight like crazy over remix or this and that. You know, because we both have very definite ideas. And I'm sure that John felt that way, too. John must have felt, well, can we really work together? But somehow we were so well, and we were all prepared to sort of maybe have a difficult time, but don't you think so?
Yeah, it was the easiest session I've ever done, I think.
5 years is an awful long time. What sort of mental discipline did it involve resisting picking up a guitar? I mean,
well, it wasn't a matter of resisting. The first half a year or a year, I had this sort of feeling in the back of my mind that I ought to. And I'd go through periods of panic because I was not in the NME or the Billboard or being seen at Studio 54 with Mick and Bianca. I mean, I didn't exist anymore. I got a little fear of that would come like a paranoia, and then it would go away because I'd be involved with the baby or involved with whatever other business that we were involved with. But that only lasted about 9 months, and then there was suddenly like it just went away. And I realized there was a life after death, you know, I mean, there was a life without it.
Did you enjoy that realization?
It was great. It was like, oh, my God, and I would sit around thinking, what does this remind me of? What does this remind me of? I thought, this reminds me of being 15. I didn't have to write songs at 15. I wrote it if I wanted to, or I played rock and roll if I wanted to. I didn't have to do it. I didn't have some imaginary standard set up by me or some group of critics or whatever.
In other words, back to the days before the pressure started.
Yeah, so I sort of got back to that, and then that's when I suddenly could do it again with ease. The most enjoyable thing for me, apart from putting them on the tape when you first put them, is the inspirational in the spirit. Because when the songs really come and you're not sitting down like a craftsman writing, I can do that. You know, you want a song about bananas for a movie, I could do that. Okay, you know, I'm quite capable of turning it out like that. I wouldn't enjoy it so much maybe, but I could do it on that level. But my joy is when you're like possessed, like a medium. I mean, I'll be sitting around and it'll come in the middle of the night or the time when you don't want to do it, you know. That's the exciting part. So I'm lying around, and then this thing comes as a whole piece, you know, words and music, and I'm thinking, can I say I wrote it? I don't know who the hell wrote it. I'm just sitting here and this whole damn song comes out. So you're like driven, and you find yourself over on a piano or a guitar, and you put it down because it's been given to you, or whatever it is that you tune into.
How did you find him during this period, Yoko?
Yes, he was doing that, and of course I was doing that too. We're very similar that way, you know. So when it comes, it comes.
But were you relieved that he had finally decided to lay down the guitar and rest?
We weren't suffering or we weren't feeling worried when we were just relaxing. So there was no strong feeling of relief. In fact, the nicest thing about Double Fantasy was that while we were making, we were fully aware that we didn't have to make it. We were making it, we were enjoying it, but we could always go back to the other life, because the thing was that we now know that we have the other life as well. It's not like we have to always be in the front, you know.
Yeah, so that was the joy of it. It's the same joy now. Had it not been accepted, and by now it has been well accepted in England and America and various parts north and south of the world. But if it hadn't, we would have been hurt, but then one wouldn't have wanted to kill oneself or go back to the bottle because somebody didn't like your record or whatever. So knowing that gives you a kind of freedom that you have when you're younger, when you don't have a past to live up to. And that's the joy of it.
Were your friends very surprised that you adopted that stance as far as taking the 5 years off were concerned? I mean, was there any external pressure which people put on you and said, come on, John, what's happening?
There was a lot of... That's why remember when you asked me, I think it was off mic before we started, you know, you got any English friends in town? Well, suddenly when Mick Jagger or David Bowie or Elton John came to town, I wouldn't respond, you know, because they'd always want me to go down to the studio or to the clubs, and I didn't want to get in there again. It's like birds of a feather. So I didn't want to go back in that pressure part of my life again. I wasn't ready to do that. And there was pressure from friends like that. And Mick did this whole spiel in The Observer in London, which I read in Tokyo, because we spent half the first 3 years of Sean's life, half of the early 70s in Japan, 6, 7, 8 months at a time. I got this version of it in Tokyo, where Mick was saying, come on, John, get out of there. Everybody was sort of on my case, as they say, saying, how dare I not be doing it? You know, what's it got to do with Mick whether I'm not doing it? All the rock stars were commenting about what I was not doing. You know, I couldn't understand them. I thought, how square of him, you know, how dumb. He's going on about you hiding behind your kid, you know. He's trying to be nice about it. He wasn't attacking me, but it was sort of with a little edge to it. He said, I like John very much, but he's hiding behind Sean, and why doesn't he get his finger out? And Yoko's got him locked up. I know what that is like. Don't kid me that you're doing it for the family, because you can have both. Well, he lived to learn that lesson, because he didn't have both. And that was before he split with Bianca and the child and all that, and that which I feel sorry for him about, the pain that one goes through separation and having a child involved. But I didn't feel as though I could have both, and it was more important to have a relationship with Yoko and with the child than to be seen.
Another thing that we noticed in the 60s when we were waving flags and all these people who are trying to change society for the good and all that, they'll be running around with flags and banners, but at the same time they forget their family, and they have a split or, you know, divorce, and the children are ignored and the wives are resentful, that sort of thing. So we felt that we just have to try to clean up our personal life as well, and sort of like really take care of each other, you know.
Well, even with the Jerry Rubins and the Tariq Alis and that, we'd always comment to them, and after they'd left, well, where's the women? You know, where's the women running Redmore? Where's the women socialists? Where's the women left-wingers? Where's the women in on the meeting about how they're going to overthrow the government or whatever the hell they were talking about?
And Jerry's girlfriend typing his thesis or something, you know, was...
Going to liberate the world, but
Typical.
they're all doing the typing and making the coffee, you know. Come on, this is garbage. But, you know, it took us time to sort of see through it all.
To look at that period, John, musically, there was, of course, a song that you wrote for the Double Fantasy album, which explains in the lyrics exactly why you were content with the time that you spent, for want of a better phrase, withdrawing, as it were. And, of course, that song is called Watching the Wheels.
Yeah.
Andy Peebles was talking to John Lennon and Yoko Ono on December the 6th, 1980 in New York. In the fifth and final part of the BBC's tribute series, the conversation will cover John's new recording deal and the making of the album Double Fantasy. The programme was produced by... In the fourth part of the interview, we heard about John's so-called 5-year withdrawal period and about the way John and Yoko tended to reverse their respective roles during that time. In this final programme of the BBC's tribute series, Andy Peebles talked to John and Yoko about John's re-emergence, marked by his new recording deal with Geffen Records and by the album Double Fantasy.
Well, as I sit here talking to you, you look two very happy people. Which of you, or was it both of you, first got in contact with David Geffen, presuming that you made the contact?
Oh, well,
He
yes,
made
I
the
did.
contact,
Oh,
didn't
well,
he?
yes, he did first.
She did the
And then
business.
I-
She did the deal.
I just called him back, and we decided to meet. So he came to my office, and I was checking him, you know.
You see, the point being about me cooking and her doing the business, was before we'd always had somebody come in to look after the business, and you know the story of that. Some lawyer or some accountant would come in and say, I'll handle it all for you. Since 1962 they've been handling it, and had nothing but tax problems. We don't own any of the Beatles songs, we don't own any of the Beatles records, we got farthings for royalties and all the rest of it.
When you sold your 25% share in Apple,
No, not yet.
is it on the way?
No.
Anyway,
Now
the
we're
point
too
being that
busy with
we
other
decided
things.
not to have an outside party, so
Right,
therefore we
right.
had to look after our own stuff and face that reality. She could deal with it, so I dealt with the other side, which I could deal with. I'm a homebody. I always like to hang around the house.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are many men who feel that way, about the fact that they really would like to be at home, secretive, or maybe just cook. You know, a lot of men are very good cooks, and they like to exercise that talent, but then it's supposed to be something sissy and they're not supposed to do. There's that. And also, it was mentally healthy for us to just sort of exchange roles in a way, to see the other side, you know, that sort of thing.
So along came Mr. Geffen, and you made the decision to record the album Double Fantasy, which we've been hearing a lot of recently. You also told me, John, that there were, in fact, 22 tracks originally? You've included 14, and a little while ago I was hearing something which isn't on the album, which was
Yeah.
very interesting indeed.
Actually, we recorded the album before we talked to Geffen.
Right, exactly.
We decided to make it first and then answer all the letters and inquiries that came. We eliminated the ones that said, can we hear it first? Okay, you can go to hell. Also, he wasn't a big company, so you weren't dealing with this anonymous grey suit with the president changing every 2 days. I mean, there was more presidents of Capital and EMI. They were always waiting for the Beatles to die. They died first every time, you know. They always treated each record as the last record.
In the stage of negotiation, did the old fear come back from the old days, that you were having to take a step which involved somebody else?
Yeah, I was terrified. I was saying, can't we put it out without putting it out? You know, couldn't we do something else? Do I have to put my name on the paper? For the last 5 years, the first time I didn't owe somebody songs or records. For the last 15 or 20 years, since 1962, I was signed up to somebody or other, and thankful to be in 1962. But what you sign when you're 21, and it goes on for 20 years, and they own your life and soul, and you can never get out of it. So I liked the 5 years when all contracts were free. I was free of any contractual obligation. When she finally says, well, you know, you're going to have to sign something to say that they have the right to put the record out. I was saying, are you sure? Are you sure? You know, why don't you sign it? You know, you put your name on it. I don't want to put my name on it. But we made arrangements which didn't make me feel paranoid, because I don't want to owe people nothing. The point of being a musician or an artist, to me, was the freedom.
How easy was it to get musicians together?
Oh, easy. They were
was it?
panting at the doors, man. They all couldn't wait to get in. All the ones I used to work with were sending messages, and I felt bad, but I didn't want to go back in the same bag, you know. I heard from Jesse Ed Davis and Klaus and all them, but I wanted to start really brand new.
And we were very lucky,
The
weren't
only
we?
guy I knew was Hugh McCracken, who'd worked on Christmas song and maybe a couple more tracks.
And you got Andy Newmark on drums.
Yeah, who toured with George.
Somebody you'd known for a fair while, I presume.
No, I
No.
might have met him backstage when George did some concert, not in New York, across the water. I never remember the Trent or New Jersey, somewhere. And I probably met him backstage. I don't remember him at all. Tony Levine, the bass player, fantastic. I didn't even know he existed. He's famous, but I didn't know he'd worked with all sorts of people. So, you know, the only guy I knew was Hugh McCracken. I'd used him. He was a New York guy. When Bowie was in his R&B incarnation at that period, mid-70s, Earl Stick had been his guitarist. But I hadn't met him, even though he was on the Fame album. Yeah. We were not in the studio at the same time.
And you recorded it where we're sat at this very moment in the Hit Factory.
We are sitting in the very... This is the very room. The very room where it happened. You know, the double fantasy was brought alive, as it were, in its very bloody room, wasn't it, dear? Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You're wasted, Mr. Lennon, you're wasted.
I love Faulty Towers. I'd like to be in that, you know.
Would you?
I mean, part of me would sooner have been a comedian, you know. I just don't have the guts to stand up and do it, but I'd love to be in the Monty Python.
Yeah.
You know, rather than the
That's the
Beatles
thing
in a
that
way.
saved us, the
Or the
fact that
Goons,
he's
yeah.
funny, and he says I'm funny, so we
Most peculiar.
both make each other laugh in a way.
Faulty Towers is the greatest show I've seen in years. If they have it over here now, God, it's great. I mean, what a guy, he's great. Public TV here buys them all, you see. We get all the Masterpiece series stuff. We've cried our way through, what is it, Lydia?
Oh,
And,
yes.
well, everything, all those series, we watch them over here. Beautiful stuff, you know. And I see all the English countryside, you see, and then I think, oh, well, it saves getting on the plane, you know. And there it is, all green and wet, and it looks beautiful. The voyeurism is the sort of being in England without being there.
So you recorded the album before the deal came up and
Yeah.
the album was released. Let's talk about the single, Just Like Starting Over. Was that an obvious choice to the both of you as a single? Were you happy with that?
Yeah, it was really called Starting Over, but while we were making it, people kept putting things out with the same title. You know, there was a country and western hit called Starting Over, so I added Just Like at the last minute. It was obvious because it was the one where the musicians got very loose. Because it was so simple rock and roll, there was no problem. They really relaxed, and they'd all be like that after it. Even though I don't think it's the strongest track, perhaps. Some of the other tracks are stronger, like Losing You. It might be a stronger piece of material. But Starting Over was the best way to start over. And to me, it was like going back to 15 and singing a la Presley. All the time I was referring it to John, the engineer's here in the room with us. I was referring to it as Elvis Orbison, only the lonely. Like that. It's a kind of parody, but not really a parody.
A little tongue-in-cheek?
A little.
very.
Well, when I was doing it, I was cracking up. Oh, it's been so long since it took a... You know.
He was winking, yes.
I've had tongue-in-cheek all along. I'm the walrus. All of them had tongue-in-cheek. Just because other people see depths of whatever in it, what does it really mean? I am the Eggman, you know. It could have been the pudding basin for all I care. Just... tongue-in-cheek.
Do you and did you get fed up with people ostracizing your lyrics and trying to read marvelously intellectual interpretations into them? Both of you this must apply to.
But sometimes it's fun, but then it gets to be stupid. That's why I started from the Mother album onwards, trying to shave off all imagery, pretensions of poetry, illusions of grandeur, I call a la Dylan-esque. I didn't want any of that. Just say what it is, simple English, make it rhyme and put a backbeat on it and express yourself as simply, as straightforwardly as possible. As they say, northern people are blunt, right? So I'm trying to write like I am.
Yeah.
And I enjoy the poetic side, and I'll probably do a little dabble later, because Yoko's lyrics are so poetic, I get, well, maybe I should do some of that, you know. So, and the track you were talking about, the Walking on Thin Ice, was one of the extra tracks. We cut 22 tracks in 10 days. I mean, we were just had diarrhea of rock here, you know. And we just zapped out these 22 tracks and got it down to 14. One I played you before was Walking on Thin Ice, which was one of Yoko's tracks that we didn't put on for many, many reasons. Some were selected and
Which
not.
is a marvellous dance track, I must hastily add.
Kiss, 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 which is the other side of Starting Over, is getting a lot of
Yes.
rock club, new wave, whatever you call it, disco exposure. So we made a special kind of disc for them, and we came up with the idea, why don't we give them something they don't have? And we made a kind of disco-esque, long 6-minute version of Walking on Thin Ice. There's a separate market, disco, or rock club, and it'll go out to them.
And we throw in Open Your Box, which is the one that was banned.
So we... Open open your box for old time's sake.
Tell me about Kiss, 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 Yoko.
What about?
Tell him how you recorded it in the pitch dark, hidden behind these big walls here.
Yes, well, you know, Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. I started to do it, and then I suddenly looked, and all these engineers were all looking, you know, and I thought, oh, I can't do that. So I said, well, turn off all the lights and put the screen so that they put the screen around me. And I did it that way. You know.
We were all sitting there, and all we were saying, "What's she doing?" You know, she was having an orgasm, and nobody was there. And I was saying, "Well,
it's called acting, my dear."
Oh, very good, dear, very good. Yes, Ziggy Stardust.
Do you get embarrassed in studio, Yoko, doing something like that? Do you want to be on your own and a bit shrouded?
Well, we were all.
So you can
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was John, me, and Jack, and Lee, the engineer, and a few people. We're all, you know, in there. And
I'm glad I didn't know that.
She's trying to do, you know, what is it? I got that image of that Japanese movie running through the grass, you know.
Yes. Kiss, Kiss, Kiss is what it is, and the song itself will explain. And so if you listen to it, you will get whatever you want to get out of it, probably. But it's mainly sort of like a feminine energy and vulnerability that women are not getting scared of exposing now. And it's all right to show vulnerability. And in a way, it's like saying, well, this is woman.
In what you've just said, the most interesting statement to me is that the person listening will derive what they wish out of it. Do you deliberately go to produce songs like that? Because it's rather like the movie business, isn't it? You can go and see an adaptation of something, and it sticks in your mind as being the adaptation that you might remember for the whole of your life. If you write a song and people can derive what they want from it, it's a very personal thing, isn't it? And that's a special way of communicating.
Oh, yes, well, I can't help doing it, so I'm not saying that I do it intentionally, but I have these visions and visual things, you know, and that comes out. You can interpret a vision in any way you like, in a way. You know?
Do you feel now at this stage that the team and the ease of writing is now back with you? And,
yes.
and that you're going to be extremely prolific in the months and years to come?
Yes, I think it's going to be... At one period, they say, those two will do anything for publicity, get them off the front page, you know, get them out. You know, people are bitching at us because we were always doing something, and then they were bitching at us because we weren't doing anything. And I have a funny feeling that it's going to be the other way around again, because we're talking and talking and talking, and all sorts of plans and ideas we have in our head. It's just a matter of getting it done. We already got half the next album, and we'll probably go in just after Christmas and do that. And we're already talking about what the idea for the third album is already laid out, and I can't wait. So it's a matter of just getting it done. I'm sorry about you people that get fed up of hearing about it, but, you know, we like to do it, so it's too bad.
Yeah. The problem is, of course, there's always the time gap between you finishing the recording and people like myself being allowed to sit and talk to you. And that always worries me somewhat, because it's past history to you, and as you've just said a moment ago, you're 2 albums ahead of me as we sit here now.
Right, we're already on the third in our minds, but the second physically, as it were, beginning to think about it. You can't do it at the same time, you see. You can't be discussing it while you're making it. You don't even know what you're doing. You're kind of making it, and you're so into it, you cannot be objective about it. Even some of the records I made, when you talk about them, at the time I wasn't consciously knowing what you're doing in a way. You're not conscious of what you're expressing. And it's sometimes about 2 or 3 years later when I realized what we made then. So Double Fantasy, I can talk all night about it, but it'll be 2 years before I can see it really, what it is. It's like inviting into the rehearsal of a play and then...
changing it the night afterwards.
Right. Even the opening night, it can change the night after, right? So it's too bad. Too bad.
A series of tremendous luck, tremendous amount of luck made us finish that album in a way.
And
it's
the fact
amazing.
that we can work together and express it in many different ways, from starting over to Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. I mean, the difference is obvious in the sound and everything, but that we can both be part of both.
Beautiful Boy, John, a song about Sean.
Yeah. Well, you know, Stevie Wonder wrote about his kid, right, didn't he?
Isn't she lovely? That was
So,
recorded here, wasn't it? You did Songs in the Key of Life in this studio,
yes,
I think I'm right in saying.
in Hit Factory, New York, yeah. Down in very near Times Square, folks. You come out of here after a session and there's strange women standing on the street. You know, I mean, it's really cooking, you know, it never stops.
Yeah.
The time I was with Sean in the kitchen with the bread, you know, all that, I kept thinking, well, I ought to be inspired to write about Sean. I mean, I ought to. I was going through a bit of that. And when I finally gave up on thinking about writing a song about him, of course, the song came to me. When he was 4, 4.5, or 5, it was just coming up to October when I suddenly got the song about him.
Is he developing an interest in music?
Oh, he's very musical, absolutely. Because I noticed something in the hospital. When the black nurses come in, they'd put on WBLS, which is the R&B disco station. When the white nurses had come in, they'd put in on the country western station. But when the black nurses fed the babies, they picked them up and held them on their hip and danced around the room and the bottle. When the white nurses came in, they'd just sit still and jam the bottle down its throat and not move. So I thought, I want him to have natural rhythm, you know. I mean, seriously, I noticed the different attitude. Not only was it warmer and more contact, but there was constant movement. And officially, they weren't allowed to put the radio on. But when the head nurse was away, they put it on all the time. People don't want their children not being able to sleep without music. Long story short, I did the same with Sean. Whenever I fed him, I put the rock and roll on, or the R&B, and I danced with him. He can dance like nothing on earth. He's perfect pitch and key. He's into hound dog now because I said that in an interview, so he thinks it's about hunting, and bebop Lou he knows backwards.
I'm very pleased that you've actually put your lyrics on the inner sleeve, because one of my major moans in the business over the last few years has been that the amount of information available on album sleeves has deteriorated in some cases to absolutely nothing.
Do you mean they've stopped printing the lyrics?
Oh yes, and they've stopped telling you who's playing on the album, and they've pretty well stopped telling you everything. I wouldn't say that for all record companies, but certainly far too many.
Must be financial, right?
It could be.
I mean, what other reason? They just don't want to spend the money on the print. You know, I'd sooner have the lyrics and no cover.
But it's not much money, I don't think, to print.
Oh, it is.
Is it?
Every penny counts, look.
I understand.
John, can we talk about I'm Losing You, which I think reflected your times alone in Hong Kong? Was that when you wrote that song?
It was actually in Bermuda. I called her, you know, and I couldn't get through. Can you imagine it? Through the office, she was...
Because I was so busy.
She was so busy, so many calls, and I couldn't... I got really mad, you know. And I wrote this song in the heat of passion, as it were, which is great for songwriting.
Or anger, shall we say.
But getting a bit distant from it, it is expressing the losing you of the 18-month lost. It was everything, losing one's mother, losing one's everything. Losing everything you've ever lost is in that song. That's losing whatever. But sparked by the fact that I couldn't get through on the damn phone. Can't even get you on the telephone.
And Woman, which is, I must say, a great favourite of mine.
Oh, thank you. I like that one, although I'm sort of embarrassed because it sort of sounds a bit like Girl and a bit Beatley and a bit, but I do like it
Why
myself.
does that embarrass you?
Because I'm still a bit feeling I'm supposed to be macho Butch Cassidy or something, and tough Lennon with the leather jacket and swearing and all that, and I really am just as romantic as the next guy, you know, and always was. It's the sort of 80s version of Girl to me, you know. Like I referred to the other ones, Elvis Orbis, and this one I call the Beatle track all the time. I said, oh, the Beatle track, let's do the Beatle track tonight. But to me, it suddenly dawned on me about the woman thing. I was in Bermuda again, and it suddenly sort of hit me about what women represent to us, not as the sex object or the mother, but just their contribution. That's why you hear me muttering at the beginning for the other half of the sky, which is Chairman Mao's famous statement. That it is the other half. I mean, all this thing about man, woman is a joke. Without each other, there ain't nothing. So it was like this sort of, my God, it was a different viewpoint of what I'd felt about women, and I can't express it better than I said in the song. And it's for...
I want to talk to you very briefly about what has been going on back home while you've been here for 5 years. And ask you firstly for your views on the new wave music that you must have heard, because you were telling me before we started recording and chatting that there are a couple of stations in New York which have actually gone out on a limb and played some pretty fiery music, shall we say.
Oh, yeah, I'm a champion of it now. I like it, you know. I mean, look, when they catch up to the Yoko Ono Plastic Ono band, okay? So that's the answer to that. And anybody who thinks, oh, well, dumb old Lennon just got stuck in the 60s to do Starting Over and Losing You, you think I don't know what she's doing? You think we went with Cold Turkey and Don't Worry Kyoko and Why and Open Your Box? You hear it all there. I'm aware of the B-52s and Madness. Don't do that. Do this. I think that is the most original thing, actually, because it's so peculiar.
Yeah.
You know, I think out of all that mob, that was one of the most original sounds, very good drumming, very good bass and all that. Now, as I said, I was listening to classical music and not really following it. I saw Sid Vicious die and all that on video in New York because they were all coming over here to make it in the Big Apple, as they called it. So whoever came through, I could see him on this cable TV thing they have here. So I saw Blondie when she was unknown on the cable TV. I saw Vicious when he was living in the hotel being filmed and doing all that stuff, whenever that was, mid-70s.
How much of the Pistols' music have you heard?
Only whatever they did a video of it. You know, there was a lot of videos of them down at Max's or wherever the hell they were hanging out and playing, and Johnny Rotten and all that stuff. And yeah, great. To me, initially on Impact, seeing all that, I thought, oh, that's how we used to behave at the Cavern before Brian told us to stop throwing up and sleeping on stage and swearing. I mean, like in Hamburg, I used to sleep on stage. We used to eat on stage. We used to swear on stage. We were absolutely au natural. But nowadays, they don't have to put a shine over on it to get a record contract, even though they are having a hard time with it. But still, yeah, I think it's great. I absolutely do. And when I was in Bermuda, a guy that works for me, Fred Seaman, had turned me on to the B-52s, Lenny Loveridge, or whatever her name is.
Lenny Loveridge, yes.
Yeah, Madness, about 2 years ago, but then I wouldn't listen. I'd asked him to go out and make me some reggae records and put it on a cassette, and on the other side he put all that stuff, B-52s and all that, about 2 or 3 years ago, whenever they came out. And I wiped it out, didn't even bother listening to it. I wasn't interested in anything other than what I was doing. But in Bermuda, I said, Fred, what was all that stuff you give me? Go and get me it again. And he brought me Madness, B-52s, Pretenders. And I said, oh, this is great. He said, well, I played it. I gave it you 2 years ago. Why didn't you listen? I said, I didn't want to listen then. And now I want to hear what's going on. Yeah. So I dig it.
And you dig reggae, too, because you were saying that there are some stations here that actually play dub reggae.
Oh, they play dub. In the last 10 years, the thing I missed most about England was reggae. And in the last 10 years, a lot of Caribbean people have come here from Haiti, from Jamaica, and all points down there, and they've created a whole community and a whole thing, and it's getting very hip, the reggae, different from England's reggae. There's more R&B in it over here. Down in Brooklyn, they're making it. And it's very interesting. They play the English reggae and the New York reggae and the island reggae. There's all different styles. And the dub reggae, even the DJs are on echo. Well, man, you come to on the echo. But listen to Paper Shoes, Yoko Ono, second album.
I mean, we've done it all, really, you know.
We've been there and back, honey.
And that's
but I still
10
like
years ago,
to do
you know.
straight rock and roll. I still, Losing You is a straight blues. Forget about the lyrics. I could be singing My Mommy Done Gone. It's blues, straight. Starting over is straight pop rock, 50s style.
What about the American music scene at the present moment? I found it a bit soft listening to the radio here, particularly the rock stations.
They've gone top 10. FM was really, they played albums, but the financial and all the things that get involved, things can never be always the same. So they're going through a change now because the WNEW and WPLJ, the big white rock stations here, and they have started introducing a lot of what you call new wave. But before they did it, a new wave station opened, which just plays nothing but the clickety, 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 click, you know, whatever they call it, all the time. And, of course, New York being what it is, they know what's going on in London because people are going back and forth all the time. It was in the air all the time. It was being played in clubs. It was talked about like underground. You know, everything starts down there. And as soon as they make a hit record, whoever it is, everybody's going to say, this old out, and somebody else will come with a blue nose and a green ass, you know, and that'll be the new thing. So it has to move up and diffuse and become part of the scene. I did a TV show in 1973 with a guy called Tom Snyder, and he said, what music do you like? I said, disco and reggae. I should have invested in reggae because I never thought the Americans would get on. The Beatles made an attempt at ska. The solo on I Call Your Name was ska, deliberate and conscious, right?
Yes.
That's nice.
Oobla Dee was semi, okay? So you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But I'm willing to learn anything. I dig it. I do enjoy it. I enjoy the best of it. I was in Bermuda in a disco. Okay, I finally went out one night to a disco. I haven't been to a disco since the ad-lib days in London, okay? And people were trying to get me to all these ones in New York. I just didn't want to know. They said, but it's different. I said, what, you mean more lights? You know, what the hell do I need to
less lights.
sit there in the dark looking at all these weirdos? I've got enough in my head. But I finally went with Fred, this guy that works with me, when we were separate. Not separate for any real reason, just a holiday. And I went there, and upstairs they were playing the disco, and downstairs I walked in, they're playing Rock Lobster. And I sort of said to him, Jesus, get the axe out and call Mother. She's finally made it. She mightn't be her doing it, but they're doing her to a T. I mean, they studied her. Yeah. They admit it, too. So I called her on the phone and said, you won't believe this. I said, there's a group called B-52s. I'd heard their name for years and years whenever they'd been around, but I never really listened. I said, there's somebody doing your act there. She won't listen to anything, you know. She's absolutely self-contained. I sat her down and she said, listen to it. I said, they're ready for you this time, kid. She said, well, I'm not going to do the same old stuff again. I said, do what you want.
Because I did it 10 years ago.
Do what you want, but do it. So here we are, and we're doing it.
No, but you see, when Jack Douglas, he was assisting with all the albums that we made here, and he was very good. And when we decided to call him, I found out that in the 5 years that we were absent, that he became a very famous producer, whatever. All right, so we co-produced with him, and so when he came, he said, well, all these young people are following you, you know. So, that sounds sort of silly. Maybe he's just sort of...
BSing you.
Yeah, right. So, and he said, no, really, you know, all these people are doing it. And I just still can't believe it. It's happening. I can see that. But this time, so Jack was saying, well, just show him. Old Wave can do that one. But I didn't intend to do it that way. That's why I understand what John just sort of did things that he wanted to do and what he would enjoy, you know, in this album.
You see, we could have come back and tried to be freakier than the freaks.
We can do that.
Make a conscious effort.
Because we were freakier 10 years ago than these people.
We could have just come back and reissued the early stuff of Yoko's that never really got much airplay anyway. Maybe a couple of people heard in London, right? A couple of people over here. But we didn't want to. We wanted to do what we want to do, the same as we did then when we did whatever we were doing then.
And you're obviously two very satisfied people on the strength of it.
Yeah, we like doing it. That's the point, isn't it?
In other words...
I'm calling you.
One final question to you. What about your private life and your own sense of security these days? David Bowie, I think, has recently said, but the great thing about New York is that he can walk down the street and people, instead of rushing up and ripping his clothes off, will come out, or rather just walk past him and say, hi, David, how are you? And he can say, I'm very well. Is it the same for John and Yoko?
Yeah. That's what made me finally stay here. It wasn't a conscious decision. I just found that I was going to movies, going to restaurants, and the 5 years, you think, you know, it was just baking bread and the baby. No, because I went to Hong Kong and walked around, and people cannot appreciate what it was. When I left England, I still couldn't go on the street. It was still Carnaby Street and all that stuff was going on. We couldn't walk around the block, couldn't go to a restaurant, unless you wanted to go with the business of the star going to the restaurant garbage. I've been walking the streets for the last 7 years. When we first moved here, we actually lived in the village, in Greenwich Village, which is a sort of artsy-fartsy section of town, for those who don't know, where all the students and the would-bes live, you know, and a few old poets and that. You know, people who have lived there for years, you know, still live there. But we got into this before, we didn't finish it. She told me, yes, you can walk on the street, you know. She says, you will be able to walk here, but I would be walking around tense like that, waiting for somebody to say something or jump on me and like that. And it took me 2 years to unwind, I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. Do you want to know how great that is? Or go to the movies? I mean, people will come up and ask for autograph or say hi, but they won't bug you, you know? They just say, oh, hey, how you doing? Like your record or whatever. You know, that's because we got a record out now, but before they'd shout, how you doing? You know, how's the baby? Oh, great, thanks. How are you?
Talking about restaurants,
I'm starving too. What happened to the chicken soup?
John and Yoko, on behalf of us, thank you very, very much.
A pleasure. A great pleasure to talk to you and the BBC and all the English and Scots and Welsh and Irish listening. And
cheers.
Hip, hip.